All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the June 2023 FMDiSC meeting. Good to see you all. We have a very full agenda today. And in fact, for the first time in a long time, we didn't have time to include the breakout rooms. So we're not gonna have those today. We have three and a half presentations, I'd say. And so we're going to plunge right in. We're going to start off with Patrick Reagan, a longtime FMDiSC member who made the mistake of mentioning on our mailing list that he'd be happy to do a presentation. And we don't let those kind of offers go unnoticed.
That'll teach me.
Plus, we haven't seen you in so long, Patrick.
Yeah, I've been off doing other things. I'll talk a little bit about those things in my presentation.
So without further ado, ask everyone to mute themselves for the while Patrick's presenting, and then I guess we'll have time. Do you want questions during or at the end? Patrick, what's your preference?
Maybe at the end, because I want to make sure I cover all three of these packages, and then I think we'll have time at the end for questions.
Sounds good. Take it away.
All right, I'm going to share the screen on this other machine so that it will work out best, I think. Let's see, is that working? That's working. All right, great. So thank you, FMDiSC. Thank you for all the great presentations in the past. I've learned a lot from participating in this group, and learned a lot in preparation for this presentation. So I'm really happy and excited to be able to pass on some knowledge. So yeah, we're talking about these three packages today. And here are some quotes from the package sites. But when I'm learning something new, I like to kind of sniff my way through things, kind of keep a high level view of these things. If I get down too deep on new projects or new packages, I kind of end up looking like this and feeling like this. So we're going to try to keep it kind of a high level and keep sniffing our way through these fun little bits of information. For that end, let's winnow down these little quotes from the sites. Lambda test, it's a cross-browser testing cloud. The artillery is a load testing platform. And Uptime Kuma, that's a self-hosted monitoring tool. So going in a little more detail here, Lambda test, it's a paid service. So they have their own website user interface. Artillery, that's an open source NPM package. We'll get into all that stuff later on. You access it using a terminal, the command line interface. And Uptime Kuma, it's an open source project also. You get it in operation using the Docker image or a Docker image, and it has its own website interface. I've tested these things on various, a few different products. Lambda test, I've tested on WebDirect. You'll see some examples of that. Artillery, I've tested both with the data API and WebDirect. And Uptime Kuma, it works on ping responders, but I've tested it using my FileMaker server as a ping responder, but also data API and WebDirect. Let's see, we are going to talk now about presentation time. The first one I'm going to keep kind of short because there's not much to it. The main part of my presentation is going to be in the longer coding of artillery. So there is actually coding, so either look forward to that or beware. And the last piece is going to be kind of mercifully short after all that coding stuff. But my whole goal here is to introduce you folks to these three products and to demystify them. Now, they are just three examples. In each one of these categories, there are other products out there. These aren't the be all end all. These are ones that I've discovered through my searching are effective, and the documentation is clear enough. Cost is good. They just seem to be very approachable for me. Now, why listen to me? Well, I have some experience in developing solutions. I started at the Walt Disney Company. I was managing animation projects, and just to keep my own head above water, I was meant to start my timer earlier on. In order to keep my head above water, I started developing my own FileMaker solutions. Eventually, the company moved me from managing projects to developing these solutions for other projects, and then eventually to developing solutions for support services, operations, IT, HR. Of course, Disney has their own accounting system. I wasn't anywhere near that, but I was doing like agile projects. In searching for new challenges, I went out as a consultant and a contractor, did projects for a number of different companies. And along the way, I was getting my certification every year. I guess I started doing that again just recently. Again, looking for new challenges. I've switched over to doing or working with these packages. And the reason why I've presented them this way and the reason why I learned them is because they cover the whole app development process, from discovery, working on the front end, working on the back end. And I'm calling it support here. I'm not sure that's the best term, but you see what I'm trying to do here is to show that I like working with Ubuntu. I like DigitalOcean as or DigitalOcean singular as a source for my virtual machines. Now, how do the three packages we're talking about today compare? How do they fit into this cycle? Well, Lambda test is something that is focused on checking your front end. You can see that it also checks your back end because, of course, your back end doesn't work. Your app's front end is not going to work. Artillery is by itself focused on the back end. It is mainly designed for checking APIs. But you can add a plugin. It has a plugin capability, and I'm going to use the Playwright plugin so we can check a little bit of the front end. You don't see it while using the plugin, but it does check the front end. Uptime Kuma, you can use it just for checking your servers, see about pings, whether in other words whether there are ping support or ping responses. But you can also go up into the back end and front end. I'll show a little bit of that too. So altogether, these three provide a pretty good basic testing and monitoring triplet, if you will. You can keep track of your web front end pretty well using these tools. Okay, so going back into these three, let's check or concentrate on Lambda test first. And let's see, what do we know? Going back through that, it's a paid service. It's got its own website UI, and I've tested WebDirect on that. Here's their main page. Nothing too special there. Going into their pricing, a couple of things I want to point out. One, they do have a free tier. Two, the first tier, this is showing $15. I've seen it range from $35 down to $9, and I'm on the $9 plan. So if you're interested in this, keep watching and keep poking around their site. They seem to change that value. When you first log in, on your account, you're greeted with their dashboard. Now, every time I look at this, my eyes kind of glaze over. This seems to not go by user interface design standards that I know. I don't really know what to look at. So it took me a little while to figure out what to look at. And the first piece I want to show you is down here under More Tools. It's the screenshot feature. When you click on that, you're greeted with this screen. And again, my eyes always kind of glaze over, but what you're trying to do is enter a URL and then choose between browsers here. There are window browsers and there are Mac OS browsers. And you see the pattern, right? There's, let's see, there's the platform. You can choose to test different platforms. Each one of these columns, it represents a browser. And they go through, Chrome, Mozilla, or Firefox, Opera. There's Edge. They even have IE, and there's Safari. And then within each one of these columns, there are the different versions. So you make your choices, and then you hit the capture button, and it thinks about it for a minute. What it's doing is it's creating virtual machines and going out and testing that URL you gave it, and then it makes screenshots. So here are some. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. See, they all worked. So that's pretty cool. But where do you go from here? Well, you can't see very well in this small image, but the little rocket icons, I'll zoom back out. If you click on, just single click on the rocket icon, it brings up a virtual machine for that combination of things. So it's in this case, Firefox, Windows 10, Firefox 1.13. And there's a virtual machine, and it really works. It is, fully functional. Here, I clicked on the detail icon, and there's a detail view of my test solution. And don't let this unable to connect throw you. It's trying to connect to a dummy URL. It actually does work. It's kind of cool. Going back to the dashboard, another thing I wanted to show you is up here near the top. It's browser testing. This is just a more direct way to get to one of those virtual machines. So you enter a URL and you make a choice. Here, the same things we were looking at before are arranged a little bit differently. There are the various browsers within each one of the browser choices. There's the versions, there's operating system. It even gives you resolution choices. And again, when you click the start button, it actually brings up a virtual machine, and you can click around, and it actually does everything that your website is supposed to do. The last thing I want to show is, let's see, down here, it's the history. When you click on that, you're shown some various buttons, and you double click on any of those, and they will bring up your previous test. So it's kind of a handy thing to do. All right, doing okay on time. Let's move on to artillery. What do we know about this? Well, we already talked about how this is an open source NPM package. You access it using the terminal. It's a command line interface access. I've tested it on Data API and also WebDirect. Going to their website, yeah, there it is. They do not shy away from showing you how to install their package. I'll get into that in a little more detail. Here's a list of some of the features. And again, we're trying to make this a nice, stick your nose out the window and enjoy the breeze sort of experience. I'll bring this down to the most important points that I'm seeing. It's an NPM package. We talked about that already. It allows you to emulate user behavior with scenarios. You run scenarios as load tests. You also have the ability to use plugins. And there's one more thing down here that's important. They have this concept of a virtual user. What this does is it creates virtual users and makes a queue of them, and off they go and do whatever you want to do. And when they're done, they get destroyed. So taking these one step at a time as we get into this more in detail, NPM, as most of you already probably know, it's Node Package Manager. It allows you to manage packages. It does require Node, of course. And for those, probably this is, well, for those that are coming into this new, Node is just like JavaScript, but it's for servers. It allows you to access things on your particular machine that JavaScript does not allow you to access. Artillery requires the most recent LTS version. LTS is long-term support. It's the most stable version. You can check to see what you have by running node-v, and on my particular machine, I'm running 18.5. How do you know if that's the most latest, or how do you know that it's the latest LTS version? Well, you go to the website, and the download page is very helpful. It's saying the most latest version at the time I was taking the screenshot was 18.16. The minor version doesn't seem to matter to artillery. As long as you got the major latest LTS version, it's happy with that. So to install artillery, you use this code. The G is important, at least to me it's important, because it allows me to test on all my projects. If you leave out the G, you're installing it just for that one particular project you're on at that time. And then you can show the version by running this other code, artillery npm artillery-v. Going further into the features, the next two are emulate user behavior with scenarios and run scenarios as load tests. And to do this, use a YAML file. Maybe some of you have run into YAML files before. They're commonly used for config files. We'll actually see another one further on down in my presentation. It uses key value pairs, just like JSON does. Indentation is important. That's how it explains or understands nesting. Let's create one. On my terminal, I'm doing touch and I'm creating just a file, an empty file. So let's start off with data API tests. An artillery YAML file consists of two major parts. One is the configure section, and the other is the scenario section. The configure section is telling artillery how to run the scenario. Scenarios is, well, what actually the scenario is, the test steps you want it to follow. So in config, you tell it what the base URL is, and then you talk about the phases. Now we are going to start off very simply with just a duration of 5 seconds and arrival rate of 2. We'll talk more about arrival rate, what that means. Down in scenarios is just saying that we're going to go to this endpoint, which is records. For testing this data API application, it also requires headers. And for folks that have done work with the data API, these look familiar, including the authorization. That is the token, and it does require a valid token. And to make that happen, you do these things. You start off with a FileMaker script and then a terminal command, and that's important. So let's look at that more in detail. The easiest way I found to create a base 64 encoded string is to use a FileMaker script, set a variable, then you copy the value from that variable. So here, the pattern is base 64 encode, 3548 is the encoding scheme, if I understand it correctly, and then you put in your username and password in quotation marks. That produces your string, and then you use this terminal command where the header is something that looks familiar if you're used to dealing with data API. Authorization, that's where you put in that base 64 encoded string. Post is required. Data does need to have empty values, an empty value, otherwise you were going to get an error. And then there's the destination that we're going to. It's my contact test endpoint or test file, and that produces a token. It took me a little while to figure this out. I haven't seen such a succinct explanation of how to get a token, and this has been really handy for me. So I hope this helps you folks too. Now, keep in mind, this token does expire after 15 minutes. It's just the same as normal tokens that you're using for other data API access. So I've made that token, stuck it in there. We're ready to go for a test. To run an artillery test, you just type in artillery and then run, and then the name of your file. At first, it throws out this information. It says that it's starting the file, the test run. This unnamed, I'll get into a little while later. That's really useful. We're going to change that. And then it starts thinking a little bit, and every 10 seconds, it produces metrics for that period. Now, we have a short test. It's only 5 seconds long, and the arrival rate is 2. But you can see how the data turns out. You know, there are 10 that came back with the yummy 200 code. The request rate was 2 per second, and total request was 10. At the end of the run, artillery produces a summary report, and here with a simple test, there are 10, 2, and 10. Great, okay, that's real simple. Let's do something more complicated. Let's take the duration and arrival rate and change it. So we're gonna have a long duration of 120 seconds, arrival rate of 20. And then we're going to add this other string, which is a name, and that gets rid of that unnamed thing in the results. It's useful to have this as you're doing longer tests. We're going to do another duration, again, for 120 seconds. This time the arrival rate is 40. The name's going to be adjusted also. And we keep on going until we get to 120 seconds at 200 arrival rate. Now, about this arrival rate, it's a bit of a misnomer. It really is talking about a queue or a goal rate. It's going to try to produce 200 requests by putting these into a queue, and then whatever your scenario is, whatever your setup is, it's going to try to feed those out at that rate. And with the data API, it pretty much exceeds at that. But later on, you'll see with the web direct testing, it doesn't. It just it takes a little while to work through the queue. What am I testing? I'm testing this file. It's got 100 records on it. It's over on a FileMaker 2023, otherwise known as a V20 FileMaker server. Now, the minimum requirement for this, according to FMI, is 4 cores, 8 gigabytes or more. I'm currently running this thing on these tests on half that size, 4 gigabytes of memory and 2 CPUs, just to see what happens. When I first get started, let's talk about money. Money is cheaper, of course. On DigitalOcean, this half-size one is $24 a month, and full-size minimum, according to FMI, is $48 a month. My concern was, well, what does this look like? It's not as big a server. So it is a little bit of a concern with the memory, because we're already up, I hope you can see this, up in the high 60s on idle. Nothing's hitting it. The CPU is looking a lot better. It's under 1%. There are a couple, blips here and there, and this is echoed with the DigitalOcean's monitor graph. There are a couple blips here and there, but we're still really low for CPU. So let's run this thing, see what happens. Okay, this is the second test. It starts off, and hey, look at that. The unnamed thing is gone. We have 20 per second, so we know what we're doing. This is really helpful as we keep on going. It thinks a little bit longer. The first 10 seconds comes through, or goes by, and we have metrics for that. And we get a lot of, again, those yummy 200 requests, or the responses. And we're at about 21 per second, and we got 55 total that were made. And on we go, and hey, look at this. The CPU graph on the FileMaker server is showing some responses at the 21 per second for a few periods. In other words, like 30 seconds. We're at about 10%. Okay, that's kind of cool. That's interesting. As we go along, we're up to 27 per second here. We're starting to get some timeout errors. We get a couple of these here and there. It basically means that these requests are getting lost. And we're okay because the count is really low. We're seeing 1 here for 256 that went through. So that seems acceptable to me, I would think. The number keeps going up. Here's 6 for the next one of the later time periods. But out of 1,597, that seems pretty low. And at the end of this test, we did get a number of these errors, but they're less than 1% of the total that we got back that were correct. So that's kind of cool. And memory usage, I really didn't change that much. That's kind of interesting. I was wondering at first whether memory is going to go through the roof, but it doesn't seem to. CPU, though, is up high. This is right at the end. You can see where the test ended, and then CPU started to drop off. We're at about 80%. So that's kind of interesting. These results are reflected in the DigitalOcean's graph. This is a 1-hour graph, and you see it stepping up and up and up. And then when the tests are done, it drops down. Kind of interesting. Let's talk about what we're trying to do here. In my description, I talked about load testing versus smoke testing. Well, according to Wikipedia, load testing is, you can read that yourself sometime. To keep this nice and simple, basically load testing means how will things work under expected load? Well, that's expected load. That's kind of the key term here. Smoke testing is trying to see if things actually do work in the first place. And here I'm using smoke testing to mean how much load will break it. What do we got here? Load or smoke? Well, it seems kind of like load, but we don't really know what to expect from our users. But now we'll call it load because it didn't break. Let's try to break it. We'll change this from 120, arriving at 2 seconds, to shorter duration, 20 seconds, starting off at 100. And next duration will be up to 120. We'll keep that pattern up to 300. Another way of looking at it is I'm presenting this as a graph. See, we start off at about 100, we go up to about 300. And off we go with this test. And we get started and everything's okay. We're seeing the same sort of pattern at 160 per second. We're seeing the error count going up, but still a low percentage. I would consider that okay, I think. Yeah, we're doing okay up to 280. The count's coming up high, but wait a second. We're getting 500 errors. That's different. And if we go over to the FileMaker server graph, things are falling off. Well, we're still trying to get tests out there. We're at 254 per second, but the server's not responding. And if we try to access the server with a browser, we're getting a 502 bad gateway. That means the server has crashed. So the takeaway here seems to be that using a half-size server, we're good through about 100 records for sure. probably good through higher than that, but 254 per second, we crash. And as an aside, you all know how to get a crash server to work again, right? You go to the terminal for that machine, you run fs helper stop, or actually service, you can see this yourself. You stop the thing and then you start it. I tried restart, so that'd be sudo service fms helper restart. It doesn't seem to work. So apparently FileMaker hasn't designed that into the service. And then to check, you can run this code, PSA, you can read it yourself, and you grep it. And when all's going well, you'll get 7 processes. You need all 7. With my crashes, the last one, FMS admin, that seemed to just go away. And I get those 502 errors. So restarting was very effective for getting things going again. All right, going back to the results. I showed you that I've got one test file at 100 records. I have some other ones here too. There's a 10K records and a 1 million record file in there, and they all are giving basically the same results. They're all crashing at roughly the same point. And the conclusions to draw from this, well, take it all with a grain of salt, but it seems like the breakpoint is unaffected by the file size. And the folks that have dealt with the data API, this probably sounds familiar because you know that the data API is capable of producing only 100 records at a time. At least that's my understanding. So that's my guess is what's happening here. Let's move on to web direct tests. Going back to the list of features, we already covered that it's an NPM application and the scenarios and load tests. What's different, what we need to use here for web direct testing is the plugin or a plugin. We're going to use a Playwright plugin, and I'm saying it needs for accurate result because when I've tried testing a web direct file using just the artillery base installation, it comes back saying everything's fine, everything's fine, but FileMaker server is showing no activity. So I think what it's doing is it's just testing pre-flight responses. That's my guess. But anyway, it doesn't work. Now, when you run Playwright, the virtual users are actually spinning up Chromium browsers. And if you run this on your, well, when I was running it on my development machine, I was actually seeing these things pop up in my dock. But it's very resource intensive. And instead of running it on your development machine, I recommend actually spinning up a special virtual server just for testing. That way your graphs, your other things are going to be responding more quickly and you get more information out of the tests. Well, what is this Playwright thing we've been talking about? It is a standalone cross-browser automation tool. It does not need artillery. It's used to mimic a single user's experience for end-to-end testing. So you can set up complete tests for your solution, and it ends up being something that works really nice for when you make changes down the road. If you make a change, you can run all these tests again to see if everything works okay. By itself, Playwright is not meant to be load testing, but it does work as a load test tool when you have it as an artillery plugin. To load the plugin, you use this code, you install it globally also, and then to actually make it work, you have 2 files. There's the YAML file and then a JS file. The YAML file should look kind of familiar. There's a config section and the scenario section. There's a target phases. This should look kind of familiar after what we're looking at before. What's different is some stuff up here. The engine has to be referenced. You're telling Playwright, you're telling Artillery that I might be using Playwright and I might be using this additional file. Down in the scenario, you confirm, okay, for this scenario, I am using the Playwright plugin, and I'm using this function called WD test, which comes from your JS file. Here it is, it's just, in this case, looking for a function, or looking for connecting to my destination. And then the Playwright file, the JS file, exports it, and that's where it gets used. Okay, you see the pattern there. For these tests, it's the same server, it's the same file, but here I have the file opening as guest, and there's no password. In theory, you can set up Playwright to enter password. I just haven't done it because it's a lot simpler. And again, this is the same file, same configuration, same server. All right, running this thing. Starts off, well, this is interesting. I've got it set up to do a duration of 5 seconds and 2 per second, a much slower rate. And the response that I get from artillery is not really all that useful. It says virtual users failed. And that's the one at first I had to watch, but it doesn't really tell you all that much. With my test, it seemed to just go fine. There were no errors. So then I wanted to stress test it or to load test it or even smoke test it. So I did another set of phases with a pattern that goes up also, starting off at 1 and going up to 5. And I had to make some changes down here too. I found out that this alone ends up collecting WebDirect user sessions. You know how that works with WebDirect. It maintains a session and keeps it open for a certain length of time. But the problem with testing is that these sessions accumulate and you end up crashing because all these things are accumulating. So I had to add a couple more tests, or a couple more steps here to make this happen, including this one down here, this page locator, all this stuff down here. And basically you're clicking something. Well, the idea is that you want the playwright test to mimic a user clicking the close button. Now, how did I figure all this out? First, I tried doing it manually by going into DevTools and trying to figure that out. But instead, what's cool is that Playwright offers something called a test generator. It's a plugin to VS Code. And it allows you to just go into a particular file that you want to test and click on stuff, and it'll create the test code for you. So that's where I got all this information down here. So it was really useful. Running this one, off we go. Users failed, nothing. Okay, it's looking pretty good. We're at 15 users. And the problem is that that report is only if users cannot be established. So it's kind of misleading. I learned that you have to watch for repeating metrics. In other words, these things up here, the actually that's a summary, but the 10-second metrics keep repeating because it's trying to make connections. It's trying to get these virtual users to work, and it just doesn't. And then the timeouts. Eventually, things start to time out because they have so many virtual users open. What did I get? I got 2 per second were fine. Anything above 2 started to crash. And that was the same for 100 records or 10K records. And I gave up testing at that point. What's going on here? Well, as the tests were running, total connections were adding up in some cases. I found that for 1 per second, FileMaker server was able to keep up. So the file would open, it would do its thing, it would close, and at 1 per second, FileMaker is fine. For 2 per second, it was maintaining about 35 sessions. They all cleared eventually within the 30-second timeout period. Everything is fine. Above that, the sessions were timing out. So basically, things are getting full. So conclusions, well, more testing is needed. We need to do, or someone needs to do what our own Dave Knight did years ago. There was a DevCon a while back that Dave presented at, and he did some amazing testing. It just went on and on and on. I was really impressed by that. And that's what's needed here. Either someone in our group could do that, or if you have a particular odd situation, you can do your own testing and figure it out. I'm only here to explain the tools and show them to you. So that's artillery. Next, I'm going to cover Uptime Kuma. I'm a little bit long, but I think we can cover this pretty quickly. What do we know about this? Oh, thanks, Dave. You can test for you now. That's great. So Uptime Kuma, what do we know about it? It is a open source Docker image. It provides its own website UI. We've tested on, I've tested on ping responders, data API, that stuff. Let's talk about the layers involved. So we have Uptime Kuma. It is a Docker image that you use Docker Compose to run. Docker Compose is just a scripting URL or other UGMA file. Sorry, it's just a file that you use to get the thing to run, to configure it. Sorry, I'm trying to do 3 things at once here. Anyway, Docker Compose runs within Docker. and it operates on your own operating system, or runs on your own operating system, which is really cool. This means that Docker Compose can be used to launch Uptime Kuma on anything that will run Docker, and that means any OS, which is just amazing. To actually make it work, you follow these steps. You check to make sure you have Docker. In my case, I was running 2402. If necessary, you can actually run, or you do actually run the Docker install. And it's a two-part process on Ubuntu. First, you use curl to bring down the shell script, and then you run that shell script. By the way, I'm going to be posting a list of instructions covering these steps, and also a copy of this presentation to my GitHub, so that you'll be able to get back to these things. And the same thing with Docker Compose. You can check to make sure you have it. When you install Docker on Ubuntu, that also installs Docker Compose. You have to do some preparation of directories. It's just a little bit of housekeeping. You navigate there and you make the Docker volume, all this stuff here. But basically, you're just making some volumes, rather some directories, so it knows where to put stuff. Now you actually run the Docker Compose file. Okay, well, first you make it. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. You make the Compose YAML file. So you create the file, empty file, and then you go to Nano. Here, I brought up Nano on Ubuntu, so you get a look at it. The stuff down the bottom, I was confused at first. I thought those were buttons. They're just legends, so you know that to exit, you do Command X. Here is the Compose file for Uptime Kuma. It's telling us that it needs Docker 3. It's loading the service Uptime Kuma. That's the image it downloads. It uses that Uptime Kuma as the container. And there's one of the directories that you created. Here's something that's really important, the port. The port is what you're going to use to access the eventual installed Uptime Kuma. Once you have that file in place, you run it using this code. And at the end, what you're looking for is that check mark, and that container has been created and it's been started. To access it, you just go to a browser and you go to the URL or either the IP or the host name for your test machine, and there's that 301 or the 3001. You'll first be greeted with entering your credentials that are established here, then later on you use them again. And then you're looking at the Uptime Kuma screen. I always like going to the dark mode or night mode. So you do that by first going, I went by that quickly. Up here, there's a settings icon, and then over here you change to dark. I like the dark screen. It actually is rather attractive and useful for me. You want to add monitors. First, we're going to add a ping monitor here in our test. So you click on the add new monitor, and it's a little bit small, but I think you can read it. You choose a monitor type of ping. There are quite a number of choices. We're going to do two other ones, but here you choose ping, any kind of friendly name you want. There's your host name. So I'm going to that domain name. Heartbeat is how often the test happens. Retries is, well, how many mistakes, how many failures do I tolerate before I raise red flags, before I notify someone that something's wrong? And then you save it. So it's been created. And here, by the time I took the screenshot, there have been two tests. See those two green bars? There's another view of these tests later on, but here at first we know, hey, everything's fine. Now we're going to do another one. We're going to add the API. It's a different monitor type. It's HTTP. It could be that or HTTPS. And friendly name is whatever you want. Here's the URL. I'm going to enlarge that because it's important. This is connecting to my WebDirect, rather my API endpoint. And as you know from experience and what we saw earlier on, it needs a token. Well, if you don't send it a token, it's going to send a 400 error. So what we do here for our Uptime Kuma is that we say what will be accepted is 400. So as long as this test keeps getting 400, I know everything's fine. If I get a 500 or something else, I know that something's wrong. I'm going to go up here and make sure the retries is set to 0 because that's the way I like for this test. And then we save it and bing, there we go. Okay, by the time I took this screenshot, both the API and the ping were doing really well. All those tests were fine. WebDirect uses a different monitor type. It's a keyword and friendly names, whatever you want. There's my URL, and that should look familiar because that's just how you directly access that particular, a particular file within WebDirect. And remember, my test has no password and it automatically logs you in as guest. What it's looking for in my test here is something that is here, this string, v generated body. What is that? Well, I went over to my test file and I opened up DevTools and I looked around and I wanted to find something that's unique. And there is something unique. There's a class there for the body. It's v generated body. You're not going to see that in anything else probably besides a WebDirect file. So then what else you do? Retries is again set at 0, and we're going to save it. All right, so there's the view that I was mentioning before. It's a more detailed view. This is of, let's see, that is my WebDirect test. Everything's green. And this is why I like this dark or night mode view, because you can quickly see what's going on. You can set up notifications. Notifications are here within the settings. Click on set up notifications and you're greeted with all kinds of options. I like using email. There are quite a number of other options here. I like email because why not send me email, but also I can send it as a text, in other words, to my particular phone supplier or phone company, and it will send me out texts also. Everything else, go back there for a second. Whenever you choose one of these, you need to set it up for the particular situation. So for email, there's the from, the to, my endpoint server, my mail server, all that sort of stuff. But that will vary depending upon this. And I assume you folks have done this elsewhere. All right, let's do a test. Now, remember before I said take the results of my tests, my earlier test, my WebDirect and my API test with a grain of salt, because I had crashes when I was doing my earlier tests. For this, I wanted to actually try doing crash. And I threw everything I could at the FMS server. I tried to overload it and it didn't crash. So that's why you have to do your own testing. That's why I take my results with a grain of salt. So just to get something to show here, I went over to my server and I stopped the services. And what I got was this, all right? The data API was failing. The WebDirect was failing, but the ping, the server itself, the machine itself was still responding. That tells me that the services are down. I assume I predict that if you crash an FMS server, it's going to give these results. But again, take this with a grain of salt. How am I doing a time? Still got a little more time. I'm at 38 minutes right now. So just wrapping up, we covered Lambda tests, artillery, uptime Kuma. Later on, I'll be posting a copy of this and some notes. Here's a shortcut. I've got a redirect on my website to go to my GitHub. I'll send out a notice on the FMDiSC user group to let you know when things are up and give you a direct link to my GitHub so you can gain access to this sort of stuff. Oh yeah, and there's puppy tax too. So there's the last bit. So that's it. I'm done here at about 39 minutes. Jonathan, do we have time for questions?
Absolutely. First of all, that was great, Patrick. Really covered a lot of really valuable information. I think exposed probably most people to some tools they were not familiar with. And yeah, let's open it up if people have any questions for you. And silence is deafening.
I have a question. Any tools that you tried that did not work out for you?
There's one. Okay. I've talked to you about uptime Kuma, and that's really cool for setting up tests. There's another service called Health Checks, I believe. I'll include that in my notes. It didn't work out because of price. It seemed to do basically the same thing, but their free tier is only a single test. So what I do is I have that set up to test my testing machine. So I know if maybe my local network is down, because I'm running my test machine on a Ubuntu little machine here. So I know if that one goes down or my network goes down, that something is wrong and I should fix that. Besides that, I've run into a number that are just kind of crazy. The documentation's hard to read. It's overly complicated. These I found to be accessible. So that's an answer for you in a nutshell.
Great, thanks.
I have a question. Using these tools, has it let you solve problems for your customers in specific instances?
Yeah.
Or are you just generally? Are you just using them generally as you design?
A big yes on Lambda test. I was having trouble with a website that was throwing CORS and CSP errors. So they're just security errors. And this is on my main development machine on my main development browser at the time. Couldn't figure it out. It just didn't seem to make any sense. I wasn't getting any results back that made it gave me any clues. I tried it on a couple other machines and that wasn't very helpful either. So Lambda test told me that everything else was fine. All the other platforms, all the other browsers, everything worked fine. So I was able to isolate the problem to my development machine, to that particular browser. It's a caching error, I think. And I still am a little bit fuzzy as to why that particular caching error happened. But anyway, it helped me out a lot. Artillery has so far been a what if scenario sort of thing. I've got one client that's on a really small server doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I was concerned that maybe it was going to be overloading. So I tested it out and it seems to be fine. And so far in real life, it seems to be fine. Uptime Kuma is just for my curiosity and my reassurance that a server doesn't go down and I don't know about it. So it's been kind of interesting because I haven't had any long periods of downtime, except of course when I take down a server, but I do get pings every now and then. Like my mail server occasionally will say, hey, I'm not working. And I go in there and find out it actually is working. So it's just useful to kind of get, a temperature check of what's going on with the network as a whole. That, yeah, there are some downtimes. There are some times where things don't quite work out at first, but later on I can check and find that, yeah, or maybe right away, I can check personally and find out it is okay. So it kind of gives me a feeling for what's happening with the network world and my servers in general. So it's very reassuring.
What would you recommend if you have a client who has one of those situations where one machine is really slow and all the rest are fine, or one machine is malfunctioning in a certain way and the rest are fine? I mean, I know these are server testing tools, but are there individual testing tools that you might use?
Yeah, that's interesting. The point is to isolate the problem, isn't it? Is it that particular machine or is it the network between that machine and your endpoint? I haven't done anything besides what you all have already been doing, I'm sure, which is to check on different machines. Besides isolating that machine by some kind of version, like maybe it's using a different browser to access WebDirect, or maybe there's something else that machine for some reason has to have. Like maybe you're on an old version of Windows, and for some reason they have to keep that. You can verify, all right, if I run that same, if I try to access that same endpoint using the browser and the platform that machine is stuck on, then I get the same problems. Then I would think that, okay, it's not the particular hardware, it's the fact that the hardware is on that particular operating system using that particular browser. And that could be an argument to upgrade if that's possible. So that's the best thing I come up with the top of my head. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, last call for questions for Patrick. All right, thanks again, Patrick, for that. One of the things I was thinking about was that, I think in the past, FileMaker has always been sort of on its own little island. And as it has evolved and uses more sort of industry standard technologies, all of a sudden we have access to tools like these that are obviously not designed, the people who design these have never heard of FileMaker, I'm sure, but that these tools are still applicable, just gives us a wider variety of things to choose from. So thank you again for sort of opening our eyes to some of the things that are out there.
Yeah, these tools are really helpful. If anyone needs some help, let me know. I can answer individual questions, or if you want me to, sit down and actually do some consulting work on something that's more involved, let me know.
Sounds great. And sort of pivoting to our next presentation, which is by Jake Johnson of Angel City Data. Jake's going to be talking about integrating with other tools out there. So in a very different way, rather than using tools to sort of reach into the FileMaker world, really using FileMaker to reach out to a range of other tools out there. So sort of two sides of maybe the same coin. So Jake, we'll hand it over to you. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's been a while. It's good to be. That was really interesting. I regret to inform you, I'm nowhere near as smart as Patrick. So this will not be as cool, but it's pretty cool. Let me just go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so we are going to start off just with a quick introduction. I don't know everyone here. I've met several of you, but my name is Jake. I am the director of design here at Angel City Data, just like Jonathan said. We are a Claris Platinum partner. We are certified in all available versions. We've got 3 excellence awards, including Tech Support, Partner of the Year, and Design of the Year. And we were lucky enough to get the City of Burbank Small Business of the Year award a couple of years back, which we're super proud of. We've been in business for 19 years, built, I think this number's outdated. I think it's well over 2,000 solutions across a whole bunch of different industries. And if you don't know our team, we have a rock solid team. I've been here 10 years. I think our average tenure here is like 12 or 13 years. So that's a little bit of pedigree. That's who we are. Just wanted to get that out of the way so that we can discuss what exactly we're doing here. Jonathan reached out to see, what's been going on in Angel City. This is a couple months ago, and we had a discussion about where we're seeing trends in the market for our customers. And one thing that's been massive over the last several years has been pretty large system extensions or overhauls, as well as smaller extensions. Hey, customers just need to get a piece of their data out to the web, but they're not sure how, or we want to migrate, a whole bunch of users onto mobile, and we're not exactly sure what the best way to do that is. Should we use FileMaker Go? But we've noticed this trend is rapidly growing. I mean, we've got a lot of customers who are really interested in taking sometimes legacy FileMaker systems, and rather than just scrap them and start from scratch on a whole new FileMaker file, why not use some of the power of mobile or the web to extend those systems or overhaul pieces of those systems so that they conform a little bit more with what's going on, modernized programming, really. We have some customers that have systems that are 20 years old that want to be doing this. So it's happening a lot. And over the last several years, we've explored a variety of methods in which to accomplish this. The first, natural extension would be FileMaker WebDirect. It's great. It's relatively straightforward. It's easy to get started. There are some limitations when it comes to licensing, when it comes to sort of using some of the powerful tools that come along with the web, but it is a really, really low overhead way to get started. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got customers who have come in and said, let's just do a full stack web app. That's great. We love doing it. We've built a whole bunch of them. They require a lot of technical resources from a team perspective. They're a little difficult to maintain. Support becomes an issue if you've got, key team members on vacation, et cetera. So they've presented a bit of a problem, but they do work, and they work great. They take a long time to build, but they're, sort of ironclad. Another giant one, as I'm sure all of you are noticing, we are in the age of API integrations. So just like Jonathan was saying, FileMaker is now able to really reach out to any API or accept any API, and work with so much of the data that our users are used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So that's been a massive push for us. And then, of course, go mobile with FileMaker Go. These are just a number of ways. There's of course, others. And one of those I'm going to talk about today. The issue, I've kind of gone through a couple of the issues with the different pieces. WebDirect, full stack, API, and FileMaker Go sort of are more minor. So it's really not been an issue, to integrate with an API, but we really did need a way to go, how do we get the power of the web and the ease of FileMaker to work together? That was something that was really interesting to us. The speed, the availability, the ubiquity of the web, and the rapid application development and deployment of FileMaker. And so we've been looking for a while on, what exactly are we going to do? How are we going to standardize this? Because one of the requirements is we got to have a relatively low technical overhead. We really need, it doesn't help if I'm the only one that can build anything in the web, or if Joe Gold is the only one who can handle this or that. We needed our team really to be able to unify around a solution so that we can provide that, award-winning tech support that we're sort of known for. And so we've sort of honed in on what I think is a really interesting solution. And so the technologies I'm going to show you today, first and foremost, obviously, FileMaker Pro. We use it. We love it most of the time. We're really happy with it. It's easy for us to build customer solutions in, super easy to, spin up a layout whenever we need. Calculated fields, all the power of the relational, engine, all that good stuff. We use that a lot in conjunction with a new technology, not new, but relatively new on the scene. I'm not sure if all of you have heard about it, but called FileMaker or FMBetterForms. This has been a staple at our shop for, I would say, at least 9 months at this point, and it keeps gaining momentum. We keep seeing people come back for more. So some of the technologies that we're using within BetterForms to make this happen, and this is just more of like sort of a prerequisites list. HTML, you do not need to be an expert, but you should probably know what a div is, for example. We are using some CSS, a particular flavor called Tailwind CSS. It's a really cool inline class-based styling system that makes styling super easy. And that's what I'm all about, because I like things to look good and as well as work good. We're using a ton of JSON with this. Most of the BetterForms development takes place in JSON. I'm going to walk you through how all of that works. I thought a good way to get started would just to be to give you a quick demo of one of the customer success stories that we've had using this technology over the last several months. We're working with an organization called God's Not Dead Events. They're based in Nashville, Tennessee. They originated because their president sold a best-selling book, wrote a best-selling book called God's Not Dead. That turned into a movie, which is now spun off into a whole college campus tour. They are always out at colleges all over the country, all over the world. They have presence in the Philippines and Italy and Africa, all over the place. These events typically have an average of about 800 attendees. I've been to one. It was amazing to just watch how many people are interacting with our customer. They're averaging about 10 to 20 events per quarter. So they're hitting the ground pretty hard. And once they get to an event, they engage heavily with their user base, with people who participate in the events. And the way that they were generating that engagement was starting from some paper feedback forms. We've all heard this story, right? We have paper and we're like, great, FileMaker can help. The issue is once we built the first iteration of FileMaker, they still had to take the paper and put it into the system. So one of our options was, well, I guess we could build a FileMaker Go app. And then I guess they'd have to put like an iPad on a kiosk, because you can't have 800 people at an event install FileMaker Go and then connect to your server and do all that. It was sort of messy. So that became not really an option for us. So we employed BetterForms. And so I'm going to show you what that system looks like. And then I'm going to walk through how to build a similar system, not quite as complex, but similar. So this is the system here. I mean, it's very straightforward. It's an event management system. We've got some basic event details, date and time information, the location of where this event's going to be. This was an event, for example, at North Carolina State University back in January. We're tracking speakers at events, so who's going to be there, their bios, things like that. One of the biggest parts, and this is where those paper forms came in, were these participants. So these are people who participated in the event, who gave their information over to our customer, whether it was, hey, I just want to give you some feedback, or I'd like to, you know, continue the conversation, or I think you guys are crazy. Whatever it is, they really are, you know, one thing about this particular customer is that they're not afraid of discussion. And so they really want to provide as a quick way to get feedback very, very powerfully, very quickly. And, you know, they want to be able to act on that information really intelligently. So you can see down here, these are all the participants that came to this event. We get some information like their name and some feedback notes, maybe what type of person they are. Were they a student? Were they a faculty member? Were they just a member of the community? We have some data points that we're using over here. We've got, you know, leader is, hey, maybe this person wants to help lead another one of these events on campus. That means we need to reach out to them with some specific information. Maybe they're a skeptic. Maybe they came because this whole thing sounds crazy to them. You know, we can reach out to them with alternate materials. Do they want to take a survey? You know, we quickly realized that we could leverage the power of these data points with the amount of people. I mean, we had 840 people show up to this room. The amount of people and the data points that they provide meant that we really wanted to custom tailor some further information to present to them, maybe questions we want to ask. And so what we did is we built this event questions module. And it's really cool the way it works. Every event, when it gets created, gets a default set of questions. They can be added to, they can be, you know, subtracted from, but everyone gets some defaults. You've got the, you know, what's the question text? In this case, I've heard the gospel, didn't understand it. So we have this number of questions, and you can see over to the right, we have different target audiences, and those are correlative with the data points that I talked about earlier. So if we want to go, we really only want to ask maybe someone who indicated that they want to lead on campus. We're going to ask them this. We don't need to show a skeptic this information, but if someone says they'd like to lead, we want to show them that. We don't want to, you know, have to reach out manually. We'd like the system to do it for us. And so that's what happens there. If someone is a skeptic, we load a different set of questions like this. Does evil exist? That goes to skeptics, all that good stuff. So we're really tailoring what data we're presenting to the public, anyone who fills out this form, but we're leveraging some of the power that we get from BetterForms and FileMaker to customize the view into the data, you know, for those people. So some people might only get a couple questions on a survey. Some people might get 10. It all depends on what they check. And so the way that we're presenting this information, the way where this all sort of starts, where we start gathering participant data, is through this tab here, this promotional materials tab. So this barcode, QR code, excuse me, this gets generated with every single event. I'm going to show you how in a little bit. It corresponds to a unique URL, and that URL is a BetterForms app. And that BetterForms app then receives an event ID that goes in the URL string, so that anyone who submits a form to that link, to that URL, those forms come back automatically connected to this event. So there's really no manual work to do. If you guys want to take a second and scan that with your phones, it will work. Alternately, I can go ahead and pop the event URL into the chat so that everyone has access to it. Let's see. There you go. So if you want to scan the QR code, go for it. If you'd rather use the link, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and use the link myself. So let me pull a browser window over here, and I'm going to pop this in. So when I hit this URL, you're going to notice, actually, pause. I should not use a live event. That would be smart. See, I'm not as smart as Scam was. So use this one, scan this one. Don't use the other one because that was a real event. Let me grab this URL. I'm going to paste this in the chat. Ignore that other one. Sorry about that. Here you go. And the chat. I'm going to say, delete that old one. And here's the new one. Go ahead and use this. So I'm going to launch this. And you're going to see here, thanks for attending God's Not Dead at World Wide Web. Okay, so this is the proper one. So I created just a test event, and we can go ahead and fill this out. I'll fill it out with my my work information. I'm a student. I heard about it from Facebook, and I'm a skeptic, right? Would love more info on what this is all about, okay? And when I submit this form, you're going to see a follow-up page, right? A thank you. And you notice how it's personalized. So we've done a couple things here. We've gone to FileMaker, we've created a participant record, we've attached the data points, and we've returned data from FileMaker back to BetterForms that quick. So at this point, BetterForms is asking, do you want to take a survey? And so I'll pause for a second. I'll go back into FileMaker and I'll show you. If we go to our metrics tab, here we go. So we've got some people. These are live participants. There's mine. Joe Gold, it's not a chance. Ashley, she's looks like she wants to take a survey later. I'm going to go ahead and say take a survey now. And so I was a skeptic, remember? So I get the skeptic questions. I don't get any of the other ones because they don't apply to me. So I'm just going to say no, I'm totally uncertain, evil and suffering, submit survey. That's the end of the road. Okay, so that did a couple things. It says, you can see here on the data point, Jake took a survey. I can launch that survey. I can see the answers that he provided. I can see that Ashley wants to take a survey later. There's some server-side scripting that actually uses Twilio to then reach out to the people who indicated that they wanted to take a survey later the next day. I'll make sure we delete you guys so you don't get text messages, but it's a very cool system. There's a whole lot more to it. This is a bit too much to build with you today. So what I wanted to do today was come up with just a quick demo to show you sort of the nuts and bolts on how we are accomplishing this and how quick really it is to get up and running with this technology. So I'm going to put this system away. I'm going to close that tab and we are going to build. So I want to just preface this with, I've already taken a number of steps today. I didn't want to bore you guys with some of the just general setup stuff that you need to do. There's a helper file that needs to get installed, etc. So I've definitely already taken some steps. I've hosted a production file. That file is right here. It looks just like this. It's one of the, oops, not that one. It's this guy. It's one of the FileMaker templates that ships with FileMaker. I've made some changes. You can see a QR code. There's some other things. There's a feedback tab. But I really haven't done too much. I do want to focus on the fact that I've got the FMDiSC with our date in it, the location, the start time, the end time, the duration, all that good stuff. So I have hosted that file on one of our servers and I've configured that file. And that's really simple. All it needs is an account name and a password for the helper file that I'm going to show you in a second, which comes with BetterForms. So when you sign up for BetterForms, you can download this file, really easy to use, but you do need to set up an account name and a password for that helper file to access your production file. I've enabled the FMRest privilege rule on that privilege set. So I believe I have it set to data entry only, and I've just enabled FMRest on that privilege set. The next step I took was I configured and I hosted the BetterForms helper file, which is this guy right here. It comes with a number of features. You just get sort of a home screen, and inbox is all the incoming and outgoing traffic. You get this integration tab, which we'll go over here in a minute. So I have hosted that. One note here is that the helper file does need to be on the same server, I believe, as the production file. Charles from BetterForms might be, might disagree. I'm sure he knows way more about this than I do, but I'm pretty sure that's what needs to happen. I set up some account names. Just the file comes with an admin, but it won't let you host it until you actually change some of those things. And I've also set up an external data source to the production file from the helper file. So those are really the only two, account names, privilege rules, and external data sources in FileMaker that I needed to do. The next thing that I did was I set up the BetterForms app. That's super easy. I go into my browser. If I can get my tabs right. I go into our BetterForms account and I created a new app. I just click this button here. This is the app that I created. It's called FMDiSC Demo. I go to open it. I get a number of pages that I can see, and I get to start working right away. So I did set this up, and that entails a little bit of, setup documentation that you can get from BetterForms. Again, for the just sake of time, I didn't want to show you guys the super boring parts of this process. And I did do some general page styling. So this is sort of where, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a little company called Apple Computer. They had a big announcement this week. And so I thought it would be fun to set up, maybe Apple doesn't have the resources or they spent it all on Vision Pro and developing it. So maybe they need us to be their focus group, marketing group. So I figured let's just build a little 3-question survey that gets some feedback on the new product line. Okay, so I applied some general page styling, which I'll show you here. All right, open the basic version. And here we go. Okay, so I did apply some general page styling. All right, and let's go in here and I'm just going to remove some of this that we don't need right now. And I'm going to go into that in a little while. So back on our page, here it is. This is the page as it stands. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's just say product feedback. And I'll change this to date info. Now we should be at nothing. There's no integration at all happening right now. This is just straight up HTML. It looks nice, but there's really nothing happening yet. So the next step, I did do a little bit of some of the BetterForms integration. I copied and pasted some of the custom functions that come with the helper file. I'll show you what that looks like. So if I jump into my helper file here, under the integration tab, I get a few different buttons. Copy custom functions. So BetterForms requires a bunch actually of custom functions that help you work with the environment in FileMaker. And so all I did was click it and it copies them all to your clipboard. And then back in your production file, you jump into your custom functions section and see all these that came along with it. These just automatically get brought in for you. The next thing I did, you have to do this once per file. It's just a complete integration folder. All this is a bunch of scripts. So when you click this, I'm not going to do it right now because I've already done it. When you click this, here's what happens. You get this, okay? This is some of the stuff that's responsible for the magic that BetterForms handles for you of interacting from the web to the helper file to your production file and then back, okay? So that's what comes along with it. It's not stuff that you're really ever going to want to mess with. It's really just global sort of configuration scripts. And the third thing that I did was generate an additional custom scoped hook set, which we will go into in a second. So that was all the setup. Full disclosure, I did this yesterday in a couple of hours. So the setup really doesn't take that long. It sounds like a lot of steps. It's really not. And I'd be happy to go further into those with any of you that have questions, but I wanted to focus on getting the form up and running for you today. So the first thing that we want to do, when we're talking about extending to the web, the natural first step is how do we read data from FileMaker to BetterForms? And so the way that we start that is by creating and copying the scoped hook set from the helper file to your production file. Super easy, one button, click this, generate additional custom scoped hook set. That's going to copy and then you're going to name it. So if I click it, it's going to ask me for a name. I could name this anything I want, but I have to remember what I named it because it's going to come into play here in a minute when we sort of close the loop on the integration. I already did this, and in my production file, it pasted this folder in, okay? This is what came along when I clicked that. It's about 14 scripts. This set comes with a few utility hooks. That's what BetterForms calls them, hooks. And it's really a way for BetterForms to hook into FileMaker and for FileMaker then to hook back into BetterForms. We are going to be focusing on 2 of these scripts. Now, they're already written. I am going to walk through what they do. I just didn't want to waste your time watching me type set variable name to this and all that. So that was the setup here. And so from there, anytime you're working with data in BetterForms, it's best practice to just send it as JSON. That's the way BetterForms is. It's just easy to unpack. It's super straightforward. It's a very common nomenclature. So the way that I do that is by any table that you want to expose BetterForms to. So if you want to give a table, or if you want to expose data from records within a table to BetterForms, what I do, and I think what is kind of common, is I set up an as JSON calculation field. And all that does is sets up a JSON object with some of the data that I want to expose to BetterForms. It's a really good way to maintain privacy on some fields and only expose pieces of a record to BetterForms or to the web. So in this case, I've got this, this meeting's ID. I've got the title of the meeting. I've got the date. I have the duration, and I have the location of where it's at. So that's all that displays in there. And I can show you what that looks like in the data viewer. If I pop this open and just ask for the as JSON, and maybe what I'll do is JSON format there. Oh, JSON format as JSON. There you go. So I get the date, duration, the ID, location, and the title. And so the next real step is to get BetterForms. Really, the only important thing to note there is always use JSON set element. Don't try and do anything custom. BetterForms knows how to unpack what it gets from FileMaker. The next step is I've got to set up a custom URL. Okay, so every BetterForms app gets, it's whatever, FMDiSC demo.fmbetterforms.com. But then in order to, remember we said we want to attach feedback to a specific event. So the way that I'm doing that, if I go into manage database here, I have a meeting URL field. That's just a calculated field. It has the URL, acd FMDiSC demo.fmbetterforms.com. Yours would be different, obviously. / # or hashtag, I guess. / and then this is going to be the name of the page that we're working with. I'll show you that in just a second. But the important part here to get things connected is by including a URL parameter, and I'm calling it ID meeting, and then I'm concatenating the primary key from just a UUID from this table into that field. And what that looks like is really simple. As soon as managed database wants to close. All right, so if I show you the meeting URL, there it is. Okay, so this URL corresponds with, it's the marriage of BetterForms and this particular meeting record. All right, and when I open that, I can open that just by using this little button right here. I'm just going to copy the basic one, and you guys have already seen this. This is the page. Okay, so the setup of the page really requires only a couple things. So the first thing you want to do is configure the on form request scope hook set script. I know it's a lot of words, but it's very simple. It's like 4 steps. The general outline here, we need to get that ID, the meeting ID or the event ID or the customer feedback form ID or whatever you call it, from the URL. Remember, we have that available to us in that URL, that ID meeting equals long UUID. The second step is to find and set the meeting record data into a variable. We're going to go through all this, what it looks like. The third step is to handle any errors. I'm not doing a whole lot of error handling because this is a demo. And then the fourth step, and this is all you need to do to expose data to BetterForms, is to load the relevant meeting data or any table data into the model using this $BF model variable. Anytime you see $BF underscore something, those are special global variables that FileMaker and BetterForms both have access to. Okay, so we can read and write to the model from either direction. And that's how BetterForms is conveying that data from one place to another. So I'll show you what that script looks like. Back when I copied the scoped, remember the scoped hook set, we get this script right here, BetterForms. Now it's empty when you get it. It looks literally like this. Okay, so I went ahead and BetterForms convention, this is just how they do it. So that's how I do it too. They do everything within a loop. It's easy to exit from. It's just how they, I'm trying to stick with their sort of conventions. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab that ID. It's actually ID meeting URL parameter from BetterForms. And the way to do that is just by going, hey, get me the element within this BF query, which this variable corresponds directly with the URL that called the script. So the URL that you see in that window that has that ID meeting equals UUID, that is this BF query. So we are asking for the ID meeting because we can pass as many parameters as we want. We're asking for the ID meeting value. And so we're sticking that value into an ID meeting field. Then we're finding the meeting using this really cool custom function. It's kind of like a SQL function that's a little easier to use that comes with BetterForms. We're just saying get column That is the custom function name. And which field do I want from the column? I want the as JSON field. That's what I want to send to BetterForms. And which record do I want? Well, I want the one where the primary key matches the ID meeting variable. This is how we're going to get that as JSON field data over to BetterForms. I do some error handling here. It's not, not very good. You should really do more error handling, but I'm not in this demo. And then all I'm doing is loading the relevant data into the model. And again, this $BF model, all I do is say, hey, set a JSON object called meeting with that meeting record that we just grabbed in that step before. And it's going to be a JSON object. Okay. So that's really all this script, this on-form request script does. And I'll show you how BetterForms initiates this script. So the way that works is we need to configure which scoped hook set. This is why it's really important to remember what you name them, belongs to the BetterForms page in question. And it's very important. They have to match. So in this case, I believe I used meeting review camel case. And so I'll go over to my BetterForms app page setup. Oops. And I'll jump over. You kind of have these tabs along the side and then these tabs across the top. I'm going to jump over to page info. And there it is. So I'm telling BetterForms, this is the script. This is the space, the scoped space that you're allowed to work within on this particular page. There's one more step that I need to do, and that is over on the integration tab, I enable the on-form requests. Remember, that's the script we're talking about, the on-form request hook. You can think of this as on layout load. So anytime this page loads, it's going to go to FileMaker, and it's going to say, hey, within this particular scope, which is meeting review, go ahead and run the on-form request hook script, this script right here. And you can have an unlimited amount of these scoped hook sets in there for every page if you want to. So that's all we're doing. And now let me just make sure yeah. So now we can actually refresh the page. Let me launch the app. And you don't see anything right now. You're just going to see this generalized HTML. But you notice this little tool down here. It says Dev Tools. When I launch that, this is the data that I just passed. When the page loaded, it ran a script in FileMaker. Hey, go get me that meeting data, and it popped it into a meeting JSON object. And here's all that live data from FileMaker. So that's great. Now we know, okay, well, we have access to the data from FileMaker within BetterForms. So really our next, basic step, we just verified that the model information is getting passed by using that $BF model. The next step is, well, how do we display data from FileMaker in BetterForms? We have it, but how do we put it on the page? So the first step you'd want to do is obviously review what data you have. We've already done that. We looked it up. We've got the meeting ID, the date, all that good stuff. And so I thought I'd show you just by I'm just going to change what the title of the form. And all we're going to do that is jump into the HTML, which I'll show you in a sec. And we're going to use these double curly braced, think of these as merge fields. So that's what we're going to do to start displaying some of the data that we have in FileMaker on BetterForms. And the second thing I'm going to do is just add like location and date and duration stuff as the subheader. So I'll show you how easy it is to do that. In order to kind of show you this best, I kind of like to, let's just do this. Kind of like to split these two pages so you can see our updates in real time, because BetterForms, when it's behaving, when you save the page, it shows everything in real time. So quickly break down sort of the anatomy of what the page we're looking at here. Everything in BetterForms is JSON, okay? That's how you set up a page. Now you do have access to, this is an HTML element, so every one of these sort of JSON objects is a different element. You'll notice they kind of correspond with what's going on over here. You can see there's an image. Those are my vision goggles, my cool spaceman snowboarding goggles. And I've got Apple Vision Pro underneath. I've got product feedback, and then I have date info, right? So if I wanted to adjust this product feedback line, I can either do it right in line right here, or BetterForms provides you with this super cool, basically just, live HTML editor. And you can see if I, products feedback, it changes in real time. So what I'm going to do here Then I'm going to delete these guys, and using my double curlies, I'm going to say model dot, let's just double check what we're doing here. So I'm going to say model because I have to access the model first, and I'm going to say dot meeting dot title. Okay, that's going to correspond to what I've got going on here. So model dot meeting dot title, curly curly. Now the live engine here is not going to know what's going on because it doesn't have access to that data on this development page. But when I save, you notice what happened over on the right. I'm accessing pieces of this model data live on the screen. So I can do the same thing down here in line 18. If I just say, what else should we put on here? I think let's just say model.meeting. Maybe a location, and then a pipe character, and then maybe model.meeting.date. And let's just do one more, model.meeting.duration. Okay. And obviously it's not going to know any of that in this developer tool set, but once I save, there's our data. So I'm using merge fields in the HTML super easily. As long as you know what your data model looks like, you can access any of the little child nodes really easily. So that's how we're going to start displaying data on the screen. And the next step, at this point, it would be helpful to kind of start putting some fields right onto the BetterForms app layout. And again, we are Apple's shoestring budget Vision Pro marketing team here at FMDiSC today because they don't have the money to do it. So they called us and they asked if we could do it for them. So we're going to ask some questions of our participants by putting some fields on the layout. And to do that, we are going to use BetterForms snippet library. You guys saw those JSON objects that correspond with page elements. We're going to grab some of those, specifically the radio button snippet. And my goal is to get 3 1 to 5 range questions. So on a scale of 1 to 5, what do you think about this? And so those are just going to be, how familiar are you with Apple Vision Pro? How impressed are you with the feature set? And how likely are you to purchase Apple Vision Pro at $3,500 freaking dollars? And then we're just going to apply some basic styling. I'll show you how that works here in a second. We're going to use Tailwind CSS. We're going to use text white. You'll see what that looks like. So how do we do that? Very, very simply. Over here in the BetterForms editor, make this a little bigger. You see the snippet library to the left. And again, all of our elements are just these JSON objects right here. Okay. So the next one I want to use is a radio button. So I start typing radio in the text field and it automatically narrows the list. I can even open this to see what it looks like. I get one click to copy. And if I copy that, and after my last element here, so this is that location, the date, and the duration, I'm just going to put a comma and then paste. And then BetterForms has this super handy format tool that sort of puts everything back where it's supposed to go. And when I save, there we go. We have a radio button. It doesn't make any sense to us right now, but it is there. It's a little hard to see because the text is gray, but it's there. And so now what I can do is just go on a scale of 1 to 5. How familiar with Apple Vision Pro? Let's just say, how familiar are you? And I can change the values that are presented. Notice you're kind of given the gender radio button set, but it's really easy to change. You can use strings or numbers. So I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. When I save that, here it is. Okay. So that's our new radio button. I'm going to style it a little bit because I can't help myself. I'm just going to say text white and take up the full width of the page or the full width of the parent. And now you can see it a little bit better. I'm not sure, my screen might be a little small for all of you, but I promise it's there. So now what I can do is just copy that element. I want 3 questions on here. So I'm going to copy from that comma. I'm going to go after that next element. I'm going to paste. And if I save this, it's going to show you 2 now. Now they're the same. So I should change the label on a scale of 1 to 5. How impressed? Let's just say, how impressed are you with Apple Vision Pro's feature set, right? And I'm going to save that. Now we should see a different, we see a different message over here. And so I really only need one more. So I'll pop that in there. I'm going to format and I'm going to say, how likely are you to purchase? Okay. And I could do this in the HTML editor. I'm just being lazy and doing it in line. But notice when I save, there are my 3 questions. So the next step is to verify that we are keeping track of this data in the model. Okay. And so if I start clicking around, oops, notice what's going on here. It's if I click on the second one or the first one, it's rendering in the third one. And that's just because of the way HTML works. And if you already guessed why, you get a cookie or a star or something. The reason for that is because if we look at our dev tools, we have all of our meeting information, but now we have this new piece of data in the model, and it's called gender. And that's because that was the model piece that came along with the code snippet. So how do we change that? We really need 3 fields. Super easy. So I usually use camel case here. I try to be as short as possible. So I'm just going to say familiar. I'll say impressed. And I'll say likely to purchase. Okay. When I save that now, I should be able, to control all 3 of these. So you can see I've got 2 in the familiarity, I've got 3 in the impression, and I've got 4, probably not, although I'd like it. So if I click Dev Tools, there they are, right? And if I change these, so if I go 4, maybe 5 and then 2, they're going to change. These are updating real time, okay? So your model is the key. Like the model is the way that you pass information back and forth. There's a couple things that are around it that you just have to sort of get used to. But as you can see, I'm already sort of up and running. So we're good to go on that. I already showed you, we connected the question snippets to the model, and we already verified that the data model is updating within the developer tools. So the next thing I want to show you, I sort of like the styling that we have now, but I wanted to give you, it can get pretty unruly really fast if you've got a lot of elements on a page that need the same styling. Okay. So for example, we've got text white W full as these are all Tailwind classes. So Tailwind CSS, everyone, you want to check that out. So I've got this on all 3. It doesn't really make sense to repeat that 3 times. If I'm going to use that over and over, I should put it somewhere where I can use it over and over. And so the place that you put something like that, on the left sidebar here, we've got a settings area. And this is sort of global app settings. All right. So you name your app here. You've got your common hook set name. You can apply a model. So if you want to sort of give development data in here to get up and running, you can. I'm going to go over to this DOM header instructions or insertions. If any of you are familiar with HTML, this is the top of the document. So this is where everything starts. This is where the app starts reading. Okay. So we have a couple things in here. We have some CDNs. We've got font awesome loading in there. We have some style sheets. We also have down below, we have these named CSS classes. So button primary, button secondary. Then I have this one, form input. And you can see I'm using add apply, and I'm just putting a bunch of Tailwind classes that should make this look a little bit nicer in here. And that is available to me as a class anywhere in my app. So if I go back over to pages and I go back to the form we're working on, I'm going to go ahead and replace all of these with my class name, which is just form input. When I save, there you go. We have a little bit more padding. It's a little bit more visible. It's just a little bit nicer. I didn't go full ham on this. You'll see that in a minute. But we've still got our radio buttons. We're tracking our stuff in the model. I've shown you how to insert at the top of the DOM any like parent styling you want to use. If you're going to use something over and over and over again, you really should make a generalized CSS class that apply can feed in all the Tailwind classes that you want. And you can really quickly get something that's again, I only spent like maybe a couple hours on this yesterday, all in integration and everything. And we've been together now for 34 minutes. So we're almost there. We talked about how making those parent classes sort of makes reusing common styles a lot easier. And the next step is I want to now, this is sort of the closing of the loop almost. I want to write some data to FileMaker from BetterForms. And so I need a way to get the data that's in the model, because remember that model is sort of needs to be pushed. It's not totally real time. I don't know how they do that magic, to be honest. It just works. But we do need to push the familiar, the impressed, and the likely to purchase data from our model into a new record. We have to go create a new record in FileMaker and attach it to the meeting that we're currently in. Okay, so that's the goal. We're Apple's marketing team. We want to get some feedback on the new Vision Pro. We're having a product, basically just market review meeting right now, and we want to gather information from participants. So how do we do that? We are going to use BetterForms button snippet. And this is just an HTML button, but specifically the snippet that has a utility hook. Again, you're going to hear that word over and over, a hook with a save button. Okay. And we're going to apply some light styling to that. So let's just do that really quick. So over in the snippet library, I can search the word button. I get a whole bunch of options, button bars, modals, all kinds of stuff. But this second one is really what I want. And I'll go over sort of what this is before I put it into the page. The first section is, what does this thing do? And the actions area has an action key. And in this particular case, we're going to be running the utility hook. That utility hook corresponds with the scoped hook set that we're currently in. Okay. And then we have a type. This type is really important because we can have like clear and we can have delete. We can have all kinds of stuff. We check that type back in FileMaker. And then the bottom is really just sort of the JSON representation of what the button looks like. So if I copy this and come down below my likely to purchase element, put a comma and paste, and then click format, I can see all that code now exists over here. And maybe I don't want it to say save. Maybe I want it to say submit, and I'll save. And over on the right, it's hard to see, but there is a submit button down here. So let me just apply some quick styling to it. I'm just going to say background blue 500, text white, text XL. And when I save that, now we have a big blue submit button at the bottom. Okay. And we know that when I click it, it's going to run a utility hook within the meeting review scoped hook set. And it's going to pass along the save type. So now what we need to do is we need to review the scoped hook set script on utility. Okay. And then we're going to write a support script to sort of just do the FileMaker work of what we need to get done. And the way that we're going to do that, again, it's really not that many steps. We're going to get the meeting variable from the model, which we're going to pass along, right? It is in our model. If we go back over here, and I open the dev tools, I can see meeting ID. This is the key right there. So I'll go back into Keynote. I'm going to first, and then secondly, I'm going to verify the meeting exists. I'm going to handle any errors. Again, I'm not, you should. Then I'm going to create the review record, and I'm going to attach it to the meeting, set some field data, and then exit the script. That's all we're going to do. So let's review what that script looks like. So I will come in, I'll close this down. All right. This is the scripting question. So we are within meeting review scope, and we are running on utility. Okay. First step, we need to check the hook type. You can do a whole bunch of branching on this. I need to make sure that it's a save type. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the element from BF hook, which is another variable. All of this is in their documentation, by the way. So I know it's a little daunting. There's all these global variables that you don't know anything about. It's all there. And they also sort of pre-fill in some of those script steps for you when you copy the scoped hook sets from the helper file. So it's not too hard. I am looking at the options. Remember, back on our screen, we have an options JSON object with a type of save. So the first thing I'm doing is going set a variable of type with that value. I'm checking if the type equals save. I can gather information and create the review record. And I'm doing that through a support script just to keep this script short. That support script is right here. First up, I enter my loop, and it's not really going to loop over and over. I was a little confused by that convention when I first started with BetterForms. It's just how they do things. You don't have to do it. You can just do it the regular way. They just prefer to do it this way, and I stick with their conventions. So I'm first setting a variable from the model, meeting.id. We have access to that. I am then going to an API layout that I made. That's just a table view, and I'm finding a record because I need to go create a record. So I need to make sure that it exists because I'm going to attach this review to that meeting. Then I do my really, really secure error handling, not at all. And then I'm just going to create the review and give it info from the model. So I'm going to the reviews API layout that I made. Again, just a table view. I'm creating a new record. I'm setting the meeting ID, the familiar field, the impressed field, and the likely to purchase field. And you can see here, all I'm doing with all three of these is getting the element from the model that matches which word. So in this case, it's familiar. At the end, I'm committing the records. And if there's no errors, I'm going to exit the script with a result of 1. So I'm going to save this. We're going to go back over to Keynote. And we are going, let's just see, I'll make sure that we are good to go. All right, so back in my browser, make this smaller. I'm going to assign some values here and just make sure that those values are in the model. They are. When I click submit, it looks like nothing happens. We're going to fix that in a minute, but I'm going to prove to you that something did happen. So if I head over to this feedback tab, I've got a portal of reviews, and I'll actually go over to my API layout here. You can see here, this is what I just submitted, was this form right here. So back on my meeting, I've got some cool things that just show you how familiar with it are you, how impressed are you, how likely are you to buy it. And so something did happen. I did create a review, but as the user, it doesn't look like anything happened. The page didn't even refresh. And so how do we tackle that? That's not a good experience. I really should be taken somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to get people sending in tons of forms. Trust me, it happened to our client. We didn't work that in as well as we should have. It happened. We fixed it. So just take it from me. It sucks because people submit a lot of stuff. So how are we going to do that? We need to provide some user feedback from FileMaker. Once we perform an operation, we want to let them know it was either successful or it wasn't. We need to let BetterForms know. And we can do something like showing a success or an error modal, right? If something's wrong, we can throw an error. We can give some contextual information. And the way we do that is by using a custom function that, again, comes along with the helper file that you paste into your custom functions in your production file. It's called setAction show modal. So that's one thing we can do. Let's see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and head over to FileMaker script workspace. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our onUtility because that's where everything started when we pressed the button. So I performed that script. And remember, if I don't have an error, I'm exiting with a result of 1. And so I'm checking that result using getScriptResult. And if it equals to 1, I'm going to show a modal and we'll get into the path in a second. So if I uncomment this line, all right, let me just show you what this line looks like. BF setAction show modal. Okay, I get a header message, so thank you. I get the type of modal that it is, which plays into the styling of the modal, and then I have sort of a body, body content. Let me take that comment out. Then I can either pass light or dark or some other options. So what does that look like from a BetterForms perspective? Well, now when I submit, I get a modal. So we're like halfway there on the feedback part because that's great. I know that it worked, but when I press OK, nothing happens. And I'm like, wait, did it work? I'm not sure. The page didn't refresh. I feel like I should submit it again. This is probably going to create duplicate records. Not good. So the second thing that we can do is we can reroute a user. So based on the information they give you, we can route them to different places within BetterForms. As long as you have a page for it, you can route to it even from FileMaker. Okay. And the way you do that is you use the BetterForms setAction path custom function. So what that looks like is in that onUtility script, I'm going to uncomment this piece of code right here, this line, and show you this is all you do. setAction path. And where am I going to? Success. Okay. And so what that is actually going to do, let me save the script. If I go back into my page list, this is all the lists, the pages in my app. You can have as many as you want. See this one, /success. that's where it's going to navigate the user now when we submit a form. So if I submit, I'm going to get a modal. When I dismiss the modal, I get a thank you for your feedback. So that's closing the loop on how this all works. And I'll just quickly, I know it's been a lot of information, so I'm just going to review really quickly what we've done. We have read data from FileMaker to BetterForms. We used all those scoped hook sets to do that. We included an as JSON field in any of the tables that we wanted to give data to BetterForms from. Okay, that's really important. We included a custom URL field with record ID info. That's how you tie the page to a particular record within FileMaker. We use 2 of the scoped hook set scripts on form request and on utility. There's a whole bunch more, but those are the 2 that we had time for today. We attached the scoped hook set and we enabled on form requests within BetterForms. And in case you don't remember what that looked like, all that was heading over to page info, setting the scoped hook set name. Could be anything you want as long as it's the same as what's in FileMaker. And then we came over here and we enabled it. That's all that we did. And then we used the BetterForms developer tools to make sure that the data that we were sending from FileMaker was making it into the model of BetterForms so that we can use it. The second thing we did was we displayed some of the data from FileMaker in BetterForms using those double curly merge fields. Super simple. And as long as you remember to check your JSON data and you go model dot whatever it is, it's going to work. We also worked with some of the BetterForms snippets to create page elements. And then finally, we wrote data from BetterForms to FileMaker using the support scripts that we called from the on utility hook set script. And we provided some user feedback from FileMaker to BetterForms so to provide a bit better of a user experience on that. So that is really it in terms of building a form that connects to a FileMaker file. In fact, I can give you guys, oops, let me go here. You can either scan this QR code if you want, or I can give you the link, which is right here. I'll pop it in the chat. You can go ahead and you can click it and give some feedback on Apple Vision Pro if you want to. I know you're all going to buy it. It's just a cool $3,500. So next steps on something like this, I'm seeing some stuff in the chat. Eric, you're totally right. That is exactly what we do. In a bunch of other apps, we give them sort of a, here's what you sent us. And usually what we'll do is do that in the modal. Like we'll just give contextual data on what they sent FileMaker in a modal so that it feels like they're like they know exactly, what's going on. For me, I am, sort of obsessed with UI, UX, things like that. So what I did was I enhanced some of the form input visuals with components, and components are actually in beta for BetterForms. You'll notice here I have a components area. I have this really cool radio button that I built. I didn't really love how those radio buttons look on that form. I mean, they're okay, they work, but I wanted something a little nicer. And so what I built was, if I click on the enhanced URL here, it's very similar, but I have a little bit more of an Apple-y presentation on this. So how familiar are you? I'm pretty familiar. How impressed are you? They're awesome. And how likely are you to purchase for this is doing the same thing. It's again, I can look at my model and there they are, familiar, impressed, and likely to purchase. And when I submit, the exact same thing happens. And if I head over to my FileMaker file, all that feedback feeds in. So those are 2 different pages that share the same scoped hook set. So that's another kind of cool thing, is that you can check where you're coming from. You can do things based on where the user is, all that good stuff. But that's where I went with my next steps. There's so many things you can do. We're also, we're doing full-blown apps in this thing. So we're using FileMaker as like a data backend and as like sort of administrative area where we can spin up layouts really quickly. But maybe we want to take, BetterForms can work offline. And so we have a customer now who is like, hey, we're going to be underground or wherever it is. We might not have internet. We're going to do that in Better. We're going to, rather than use FMGo and something like a mirror sync, we are going to push it to BetterForms because it needs to work on iOS and Android. This is not a bring your own device environment. So those are all kinds of next steps you can take. This is sort of the entry level beginner's course into FMBetterForms and FileMaker and how to get data sending both ways. But that is what I've got for you. Thank you for your time. I have some, Steve says needs and on hover. Well, let me show you something, Steve. There. Notice when I hover, there you go. It does have an on hover. I just probably did it a little bit too fast. And this does need an on hover. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I agree. So I actually only got those components are new. I only got that up and running last night. Just because
it looked really nice.
Cool. Thank you. I have a couple more. It looks like a couple of questions here. Let's see. Yes, it does. So FMBetterForms is available at FMBetterForms.com. So FMBetterForms.com. This is sort of their public facing page. Their support team is amazing. You join their Slack channel and you can ask away and they answer. So very, very happy with the support that we're getting from them so far. But let's see. Looks like we had 408 error. I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe that was just a temporary error. But that's what, let's see, how much of this is their stuff versus your own best practices? Go ahead. Okay. So a lot of it is a blend. I mean, the loop stuff, I wasn't familiar with that. I just conformed to their convention. A lot of the scripts that come with it, obviously they built, but you're in charge of what to do with the data. You get full freedom on, whether you want to use like that get column. You don't have to do that. You can go perform a find and you can grab the field data if you want to. It's really just a blend. I try to conform with some of the just overarching conventional methods that they use to sort of hone myself in, because they're super smart and I want to make sure that, I'm conforming to their standards. Can you hide their URL? Yes, you can. They have a whole deployment section. Let's see, where I can move something from development to deployment and I can edit everything about it. So domains, I'm allowed to change this. So if I buy a domain and I want to use that domain, you can completely hide FMBetterForms.com from the domain and just point your DNS at the server. Can you do logins for different users? You can. In fact, here is an app that, let me see, Brian, yeah. Here's an app that I'm working on right now for one of our customers. And here's the validation. I can't get in without the right credentials. So when I log in, that did hit FileMaker. Here's a list of jobs that customer, or that me as Francisco up here, I'm logged in as him. These are my jobs. I can really quickly search them. I can navigate to one and look at the items that I've got on there. It's totally mobile responsive. So as I get smaller, you notice that navigation bar goes away. This screen looks a little different on mobile. So yes, you can fully do validation. The next question is, if we didn't absorb everything here, which I can understand because I threw a lot at you, how's their help material? It's good. I would say their documentation probably needs a little bit of attention. They're working so fast. They're deploying new models all the time. There's some areas of their documentation that are a little lacking, but I've found that supplementing that with the support team on their Slack channel, I've been able to get production ready jobs done pretty easily. So it is a little frustrating when you get to the documentation page and you don't find exactly what you're looking for, but then you just jump into Slack and you can usually bet that someone's going to get back to you within like an hour or two. So I have nothing but props to give to their development and their support team. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Is that the recording of this meeting is going to be posted. So if you are getting started playing with FMBetterForms, probably you could go through this, do something, pause, watch the next 30 seconds, pause, and really step through it that way. So Jake, I think you've done a great service to anyone who's looking, exposing all of us to it who are not familiar with it, and then B, giving people the tools to get up and running quickly, because obviously, it is a complex system. and figuring out the interactions between FMBetterForms and FileMaker. You know, there's quite a bit to wrap your head around, but I think you did a great overview of, you know, what the basic steps are, as well as showing a couple interesting examples of using them in the real world. So
Yeah, it's cool when you see it in like a full-fledged app, you know,
Yeah.
environment instead of just a form.
So I think that's all we have time for today.
Awesome.
Thank you for that. And I was going to say, since you were so kind to act as Apple's marketing department, I think they should just send you an Apple Vision Pro for you to play around with. So
I'd be open to that. I'd be open to
know,
that for sure. You know, I think I'm extremely familiar. I'm extremely impressed, and I'm very unlikely to buy it. So
well, I was going to say, when you say if you did say you're likely to buy it, should just take you to the Touch ID for your Apple Pay.
Yeah, just face it. No, I didn't mean it. So, yeah, it's
right.
Thank you guys so much for your time. I yield.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jake.
Sure.
All right, moving right along. I told you we had a jam-packed meeting today. So we are going to move over to Chris Moyer to provide his usually monthly tech roundup. I think we missed you last month, right? Sorry, Chris?
Yep, last month we passed over, and we're a little jammed up this month, so I'm gonna do a sort of compressed version of it, but let me get to it.
All right, take it away, Chris.
All righty, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, there we go.
Yes.
There it goes. Okay, so this is the June edition of the Tech News Roundup, and as usual, a little hat tip to Gary Palmer of the Brighton FileMaker user group. I wanted to start off with something, you know, there's a lot going on right now, and AI is arguably the biggest thing, and I like to bring some analysis when there's a whole snarl of stuff, like all the layouts we talked about earlier in the year, layoffs. And so AI is moving super fast. It's like an animal ball there. There's like, I think, pretty close to 10,000 funded companies in the space. I think 1,000 new companies sprang up in the last 30 to 60 days. There's a lot going on. It's moving. We don't have time to get into all of that now, so I thought I'd hit some sort of higher priority things. I don't know if everyone has heard about this, but there's iOS malware variant out there called the iOS triangulation malware. Kaspersky has released a tool for you to figure out if you've got it. And so I would recommend checking out the link at the bottom of the screen here. Bleeping Computer has a write-up on it and what's going on. You can get it from their, I guess it's on GitHub, but there's also a URL at the bottom of this screen on Secure List. And it basically, you can't directly analyze your device. What you basically would do is back up your, iPad, iPhone, what have you, and then analyze your backup and say, do I have this in here? So some of you may have noticed that there have been some recent security updates for iOS devices that came out within the last week, I think. Get those, but I would definitely check this out. This is zero click, zero interaction, nasty thing. It's on the order of the Pegasus tool that had been going around. That's how they caught Khashoggi. It's bad stuff. So I would look into this. .fmp in Berlin just went off 1st of June, 2nd of June, 3rd of June. Great meeting. It was one of the best, I'd say, in the last 3 years or so. And I was sort of sitting back and trying to analyze why. It's like, what made this one better than the earlier ones? And I think it's part of it is absolutely due to Claris. They've actually been putting some points on the board lately. There's a lot of good stuff to talk about. Transactions were big, but also there were 2 really, really strong sessions on integrating AI with FileMaker that were exceptional. And my personal favorite was a session by David Haman, who has figured out how to analyze the key store on FileMaker server and dig into that. Super technical session, made everybody's eyes glaze over. But I think there were probably 3 or 4 sessions that were exceptional from this conference. And I would like to, and Heidi and I have actually talked to some of those people, and they have agreed to come to FMDiSC and present in the future. So we'll try and bring sort of the greatest hits of the conference to this space coming soon. So, you know, this was the first event on the road to Claris Engage, and it kicked off with a bang. So great session for those of you who've never been. I strongly recommend this conference. It's held in Berlin every year, right around Memorial Day. Fantastic conference, really deep technical content, and it's sort of like a mad scientist convention. Everybody kind of gets together and says, here's what I've been cooking up in the lab, and here are things I've been researching. It's almost like a presentation of research topics that you know, some of the best European FileMaker developers have been working on. So it was a really good conference this year. There is, and I don't, Rosemary, forgive me if I'm talking out of school here, but there is a bug fix in the open transaction, commit transaction, revert transaction thing. If you open a transaction and you either by a subscript or within the script, you open up a new window. And so I have a little code snippet here where I've opened a transaction window, I commit the transaction, but I haven't closed the window yet. My transaction window is still open, but the thing has committed. If I open up a new window and then try and close it, that close window will fail. That's a bug. And supposedly a fix is in the offing. It's not out yet, but it's coming out. If you want to do anything like say, hey, let's log what happened in our transaction that we just ran, you have to do it after you close the window that the transaction ran in. So it's just a little FYI for those of you messing around with transactions. The latest on Claris Studio, the April 27th was the latest, you know, what have we got? The big one was the calendar view. Dynamic field types, there's some good stuff in there. And the release previous to this got into calculation functions that were in there. And I sort of nodded my head at the time and said, okay, that's nice that they're there. Big deal. I'd rather see some of the more important stuff that I've been looking for, like the ability to use Claris Studio as a customer portal, having new authentication methodologies. But just recently, someone whipped open the primer. It's a calculation function primer for Claris Studio. And I was like, look at all that good stuff in there. And they do kind of a comparison of what's in Claris Pro versus what's in Claris Studio. And there's a bunch of stuff that Claris Studio has the capability of doing that Claris Pro can't even do, and or / FileMaker can't do. And for those of you who find the today function near and dear and were sad when it went away way back when, the today function is back in Claris Studio. So I thought that was sort of bittersweet. And then the regular expression stuff that we have in Claris Studio don't have that ability in FileMaker Pro. So for those of you who have longed for regex functions in FileMaker, we sort of have it in the ecosystem now, and I see Rosemary would like to chime in. So feel free, Rosemary.
Yeah, I just want to say the bug fix is out. We released it on Tuesday. So FileMaker 2023 V2 inside like technical version 20.1.2 shipped for ProGo and server on Monday or on Tuesday this week.
All right, awesome. I stand corrected. Thanks for setting me straight. Okay, so yeah, definitely check out the calculations primer. The URL is at the top of the screen here. There's a lot of stuff that Studio is capable of that regular FileMaker is not capable of. So it might behoove you to have a look at that. Announcements. Claris training, Matt Navarro's stuff. He's got some intensive classes starting summer session on July 18th, the fall session on September 12th. New version of the MBS plugin release 13.2, and Rosemary just said, hey, we have a new version of 20, so that's awesome. New certifications. Do you have anything to add to that, Rosemary?
I do. The Claris Connect Associate certification, it came out this week. So, and we've already had pretty high pickup. So if you want to join your peers and be among the first to get that, please do. And the first level FileMaker Pro certification will be out later this month.
Awesome. Do you have approximate timing on the a description of what the other components will be and timing?
I think, again, we're gonna do a big splashy announcement later this month once that the Pro Associate is available.
Okay.
So
Cool.
stay tuned for that.
All right. And then for those of you who are fans of FM Perception, they released a new version to support the 2023 versions. And so you can find that at fmperception.com. The other upcoming events, .fmp falls off the list since that just completed. Next up is the FileMaker conference in Basel. There's Sydney, Pause on Air in the fall. The Rome FileMaker Week is also in the fall in October. Engage You in November, and then Claris Engage 2024 in come February. Rosemary, do you have any information on sort of logistics, timing, call for speakers, topics you guys are interested in, or anything to add color to that?
Not yet, but probably stay tuned. I think we're probably 6 to 8 weeks away from having that kind of logistics, other information available. So as soon as I do, I will let everybody know. I will be shouting it from the rooftops. And just there's one other event. It's not formally part of the Road to Engage, but the Claris Beyond user group is doing an in-person day up in Seattle next month.
All right. Good to know. Check it out. Let's see. There's lots of blog content out there, but two, I just wanted to call out the Claris Engineering blog has enabling persistent cache on FileMaker server. This is I don't know what to call it, public beta kind of thing. Check it out, see if you like it. You can do like true cache or disk cache, system cache versus disk cache. I know a couple people sort of poked it when it first came out and said, it doesn't seem to do much for me. But as some of you know, I'm very interested in business continuity and server resiliency and stuff like that. And this seems like something that we should play around with and see what we can make of it. And then Soliant had a really nice ChatGPT blog post on the 11th, where they actually integrated ChatGPT into FileMaker and had ChatGPT convert plain language queries into SQL queries and then ran them against their data set, which is a pretty cool implementation. Some similar but very different implementations were done at the .fmp session in Berlin. So there's some cool stuff out there now on integrating ChatGPT into FileMaker. And so this is just sort of the first stone in what I see as an avalanche of techniques that are going to be coming out in this area. And I think that's all I got. And I will turn it back over to our MC.
Thank you, Chris. Really helpful to get that rundown of things across the industry. Your mention of the today function brought back fond memories of opening.
I know everybody loved the today function.
Opening a file and waiting 5 minutes while it recalculated today across 50,000 records. Those were the good old
memories, man. That's right here.
All right, thanks again, Chris. Next up, we have a first-time presenter at FMDiSC, Peter Lauwers, who actually Chris saw this presentation by Peter and thought it was great and suggested he come and share it with us here. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Peter. We're starting a few minutes late, so don't feel compelled to rush through. Take your time. We don't turn into a pumpkin at exactly 1 p.m. Pacific. So if you need to go a few minutes over, that's fine, and we'll leave time for questions at the end as well. So
that's great. And I always think I can do this in 10 minutes, and then as Chris is probably laughing on his side, it's always a lot longer than that. First, I want to thank you, Jonathan, and Chris, you as well, for inviting me. And I want to thank everybody that's here for giving me this time to show you something a little bit different. Where the other presentations, and I want to thank Patrick and Jake as well for excellent presentations. This one's a little bit different to the extent that instead of showing you something that's sort of done and ready to use, it's more of it's a product that we're working on that I'm going to call very, very midway through. So I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the cool, what we think are cool things that we're doing. And then at the end, hopefully there will be time for some questions and if anybody has any. So I will start here. Hopefully everybody is looking at our logo. And what I want to do is talk about a product that we're making called Test Pilot. And Test Pilot is a very little bit of background. My best friend is a pilot for American Airlines, and that sort of kicked this whole thing off. We'll get into what happened to him that gave us the idea to do this. But ultimately, this solution is for aircraft training and reference. The disclaimer is that this product is very much in the middle of development, and you very well likely will see some things that don't work, and that's totally fine. And there's some things that we are going to be implementing that we haven't implemented yet, but I'm happy to take questions about them. So I like to start with what am I trying to give you in this presentation? So you kind of know what to look for. So from a FileMaker side, from my small perspective, I think it's an interesting use of FileMaker features that weren't really necessarily developed to be used in a certain way, but are being used and working really well in the way that we're using them, and solved some what I call key problems for us, as well as trying to sort of push our boundaries on creating smart ways to do things so that we can not only be more efficient in our time, but be able to have a better ability to quality control our product. So my company creates mobile solutions, and so we have a lot of processes on how to create software, and the goal is to sort of take some of those processes and apply it here, so that as this product grows, it doesn't grow basically out of control. So we'll touch on some of those things, and if we're lucky, then you're going to find some interesting things and maybe even some fun things. So a bit of background, and sort of first of all, what are you going to see in a few minutes? What did it look like, and what is it going to look like? So what we're talking about started as looking at button panels inside a Boeing 777. That's what my best friend was off to Dallas to train on, and so that's what he was studying at home before he went to the 6-week session in Dallas, which is what pilots do when they go to train on new aircraft, and then training information on all of the controls that a pilot would need to know. Some of the controls that are on these panels aren't for pilots, so some of them don't get used in this, and that's okay. So this is what sort of the starting point was. This is just an image. This one was gotten from American, but if you search for these online, you'll find these all over the place. On the left-hand side is sort of a bigger view of this is just the upper panel for the 777. And then just to give you a better idea, I zoomed up on a section so that you could kind of see what these controls look like. So this is ultimately what a pilot's got to learn when they want to start flying a 777 and they're going to get tested on. So here's the rub. You would, and I don't want anyone to be scared by this, especially if you're about to go get on a plane, but they really don't have a great process for training pilots. I mean, ultimately, it of course works. I'm not saying the pilots are unqualified, and this country does a better job than almost every other country in the world. But the ideal is that a pilot trains on a certain number of things before they go to training class. So these panels are a great example of, this is like kind of getting in a car ahead of time as a salesperson. It's just sort of familiarizing yourself with the controls so that when you go to a class to learn about the car, they're not teaching you things that you really could have learned on your own without much difficulty. The problem is that it really is difficult. For every button and switch on these panels, there are different places where important information exists, and those sources, while they are available digitally, most of them are each multiple hundreds of pages. So there's a lot of searching through documentation every time you want to learn the next thing. And then, of course, we've all taken classes before. When it comes time to study, you don't just look it up once and you're good to go. You really want to test yourself, and so ultimately you're looking things up multiple times. And so ultimately the studying at home doesn't really go very well for most pilots. So what my best friend did is he's like, okay, so what I'm going to do is we get to solution number one. Because he's pretty computer savvy, I'm going to take Adobe Acrobat. I'm going to bring this thing in, and then I'm going to use Adobe Acrobat's tools to create little hover areas over each of these buttons. And when I go to the documentation that's got the information that I need, I'm going to paste it into these. I'm going to call them post-its because I don't remember what Adobe Acrobat calls them, but ultimately the panels that are going to pop up when I hover over that button, and it's going to be sort of a concatenation of the information from the different sources that I'm going to need. So he started to do that. I didn't know he was even doing this. This is just part of his process. And the reality is the hovering process in Adobe Acrobat, especially as you continue to add, is very frustrating. It works, it doesn't work, or it's very sensitive to where you hover, and to my knowledge, you can't see where those hover points exactly are. I mean, of course, he's trying to place them over the controls, but I found when I went to sort of look at this document to pull data out, that it was very frustrating to use. The other thing, which was the reason he came to me in the first place, is at the point that he got about 75% complete with making this thing, it corrupted itself. And I work with Adobe products every day. It's not always this way, but many times they do like to corrupt themselves, and then you just lose them. I mean, it didn't become unopenable, but it became unsavable, so he couldn't continue with it. So he came to me and said, hey, I don't know if you know of a way to maybe fix this thing. And I played around with it, trying to save it in different ways or import it into different things. And ultimately, I could not come up with a solution that would allow him to continue. But in my head, I thought, this really wouldn't be a difficult task for FileMaker to do exactly the same thing that you're trying to do. And FileMaker is much, much better in my opinion, at doing this reliably. I mean, this is, in fact, this simple task alone, this isn't the demo, because this is like, we all can do this sort of thing. This is easy. So, I thought FileMaker was a really good solution for him. I could give it to him in a way that he could do it on he could like study with this thing on his iPad with FileMaker Go, and we were all very excited. I had no intention of taking it any further than that. He's my best friend. I wanted to help him, and I thought this would be worth taking a little bit of time to do. So that's what we did. We did that, and it worked very, very well. So we deployed it for him on his iPad and FileMaker Go. Of course, it will run on a Mac or a PC. And this is from my Mac. This is sort of this is what it looked like. So he would click on an invisible button that was hovering over a control, and it would pop up a layout object that would give him all the information that he needed, and he loved it, and it worked really well. So he took it to Dallas. He studied with it, of course, at home. He took it to Dallas, and everybody that saw it, all of the pilots that saw it, just wanted it. They were amazed that, because they were all facing the same problem of having such difficulty studying at home. And my buddy's been an American for a long time, so he even sort of briefly ran it, in front of the eyes of the person in charge of training there, and they thought it was a really fantastic tool as well. So, of course, he and I come back and we sit down and we begin thinking, is this something that we actually could viably turn into a product? And we talked about that, and I began to think about, well, what should we do? What would make this, what would make this a good viable product? So it was sort of became a what's next, right? And where could we take it that was more than what I did for him? Because that's the way my brain works, right? Like I create products at work, and I feel like if you're going to make a product, it's nice to kind of know, where you want to take it in the future, and as well, how you differentiate yourself from the competition, and is there competition? So we started investigating the current marketplace, and there are products out there, and that makes sense. The thing that was really interesting is that most of the products out there focus on a single aircraft. So you'll have someone release an app for the 767, and that's what they do, and that's all it does. And I felt like that was really inefficient, and it was really limiting, right? Like, why would you just want to do one aircraft and limit yourself to just people interested in the 767? Pilots change aircraft, and I don't want to say all the time, but it's very rare that you find a pilot that's only flown one aircraft their entire career. And of course, you open up your marketplace. So you had those kind of products, and beyond that, they were also pretty simple as well. They didn't have a lot of features to them. They basically took that same panel that we were looking at a minute ago, and they just overlaid some things over it. On the other end of the spectrum, there's some professional ones. There's a company that American Airlines uses, and they use for a bunch of other software things, but their training, the training software that they have is so expensive that American Airlines won't even pay to use it. That does, I don't even know what it does, because it's not really visible from the outside. I just know that in talking to some people at American, it was just too expensive. So there's certainly no world where you've got individual pilots willing to buy this, let alone the ability to have if the large airlines aren't willing to buy it either. So that covers sort of the training products. And then on the other side of the coin is flight simulators, and flight simulators are absolutely fantastic. They will tell you a lot of things about the controls. They're not necessarily, the information isn't necessarily coming out of Boeing manuals or things, but it's not necessarily wrong either. The problem is, if you've ever used a flight simulator, is that it's not engineered to teach you how about panels. It's engineered to give you a flying experience. And so you find yourself saying, oh, I want to get to the upper control panel, and you're like trying to navigate around this 3D environment to like move your screen to the right spot and zoom to the right spot. It just certainly isn't very efficient in terms of going back and continuing to train. They also aren't engineered to run on things like iPads very well. So in fact, I'm not even sure that there's one on an iPad that would give you all of that information. So what the bottom line is, we found there's a really big gap in the middle where, if you had a great training product that gave you the ability to do multiple aircraft as many as you felt like doing, and multiple different parts of the educational process. There wasn't anything out there that competed with that for anything reasonable that either a pilot could afford, or that maybe an airline is going to want to white label. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to do multiple aircraft. We wanted to do things called pilot flows, which are like their checklists, where they've got to learn for each checklist what that means in terms of operation of the panel. So, a particular checklist is going to mean we need to do these 8 following, activate these 8 controls in a certain order. And we also had a whole bunch of test questioning for at least the 777, but they're easily available for all the aircraft. So, if a pilot's using this at home, they can learn about the panels, they can put themselves through some initial testing, and we could, of course, give them the ability to save and reflect on how they've done. So, our challenges at the point that we had made it were that this is a pretty complex and sizable thing. Every little button on the layout needed an individual script for the button, and then everything that popped up had individual handwritten scripts for the objects. I will show you in a minute what some of the graphic problems we were facing, but when you're starting with a fixed photographic model, it starts getting really difficult. So we'll take a quick look at that. Ultimately, our decision was to sort of push ourselves to think out of the box. There's going to be 2 versions that I show you where we started, and then where we're at now. But this really pushed us to think how to do things a little differently in FileMaker. So we will be selling this through the iOS store with a subscription-based sales model. And of course, we do want to offer a full range of aircraft manufacturer and models of aircraft. So that's what we decided we were going to move forward with, versus just kind of scrapping the idea. So first iteration, and we'll start looking at this in a second. We stuck with that photo that you saw earlier in the presentation, where the photograph of the overhead panel. We had all these custom scripts for every little button, and more than that, I really wanted controls to sort of feel like they were operable, like knobs and things, right? So, clicking. So, there's different information for different positions in the knob, and I wanted the knob to reflect visually what your choice was when you're getting this pop-up of what that information is. And we didn't do that in the first run, because that was sort of a difficult thing to do. So we're going to insert a demo here, and I am going to change the screen that we're looking at. Okay. So this is the initial screen that's sort of the full panel of what you were looking at in the presentation. And what we were looking at was, okay, I'm going to click on a knob or a button, and it's going to give me information about that. And when I click it again, it's going to give me information about the different states of it. What we did for these buttons is we cut out the button off this panel. We pulled it into Photoshop and sort of cut the background away, and then it's pasted back into FileMaker. And every time you click it, it hides one and shows another one that's the button that's rotated the proper way. That means there's a lot of graphic layout objects in this layout, and in fact, or there would be if we had done them all. But to me, I could see that being an issue, and I'll get into a little bit of how that compounds itself later. But this was our first crack, and we added some cool things, like if you click on a panel itself, it brings up all of the knobs or buttons in that panel and what their states are. So, that was kind of what we were doing for these things. Here's the thing. As a photograph, photographs are taken from a particular perspective, and these knobs up here happen to kind of be right facing on with the camera. And when you started getting down here, you can see these knobs graphically, they are not centered, which means that even if I took a knob from above that I had a pretty decent vantage point of and moved it down here, it didn't really work very well. And in fact, as you turn the knob, without going in and modifying the background, we had parts of the old knob that were still showing through, and it just wasn't going to be right. And much like Jake, that kind of stuff bugs the crap out of me. I just can't live with it. In fact, I should have not probably even started down this path, because deep down I knew I wasn't going to be able to live with it. Other issues were some of these things just had a glare on them, and they just weren't going to be easy to see. So we started down this path, and it didn't take very long before I said, this just isn't going to work, and we need to come up with a better solution. So, that's kind of what we did. We did get some of the other features kind of proof of concepted out in this version, like the ability to do a flow where I think it still works in this one, where and I don't remember the flow, so I'm probably going to get it wrong right from the get-go. Yeah, I did. So basically a pilot, with a particular flow, they know what flow they're doing, and you have to hit the buttons in the right order. And if you do it wrongly, then you fail. I actually think, no, maybe this, I won't, I certainly am not gonna. No, okay. So I don't remember what the flow is. It's been a while since I've used this, but we did get that right. If you get through it all, it says correct, great. That was sort of our proof of concept of that. So, so that's how this version went, and it was a good start. It certainly didn't deter us at all. What it did do, though, is it sort of brought us to the idea that we needed to do something different. So yes, it quickly became cumbersome. I didn't show you the script list, but the scripts, every little thing requires a custom script, and because we want to do multiple aircraft, and even with multiple aircraft, so a 777, even the particular version of this has a lot of variance in the controls. So American Airlines version of a 777-200ER may very well differ from Delta's, which may very well differ from Spirit's. They may not be major differences, but enough where we wanted the panels to be right. So, when you consider that, and then you consider all the different Boeings and all the different Airbuses, this thing was going to be absolutely phenomenally huge if we didn't do it a different way. So, and then of course, managing the scripts, was going to also be a really astronomical effort. So from my perspective, scalability would have been impossible. I did hate the way it looked. I just didn't like it. And I also feel like the way it looked wasn't really any different than the way anybody else's looked, even though they were only maybe doing one model. This is what theirs ultimately looked like. And I also feel like down the road, our ability to innovate and do different things was going to be limited by the fact that this was going to be our user experience. So I needed to kind of think about this from a different perspective. So our second iteration, which we'll switch to next, we drew every module ourselves, and because and every control ourselves, everything is drawn by us. And because we did it that way, we now have much better control over what we're displaying and how we're displaying it. So I also wanted to sort of make this thing actually a intelligent database, meaning that instead of just being scripts that were being activated off the pushing of an invisible button that's hanging over a control, and that each script was therefore the only intelligence was in the script, and that's why there were so many. It would be really great if we could build some tables that defined how these controls worked, and then when we used a lot of the controls are obviously the same. When we used the same control in a different place, we could have a table sort of defining its parameters, and that was going to really be helpful to us. And then ultimately, and this may be the thing that I think is one of the most innovative things in this to me, is that, you know, I was really almost stuck on the idea that, you know, how to get past the whole, when I click on a control, is there a way that I can figure out what table that's tied to, you know, in the table structure, so that I didn't have to build a custom script that said, hey, when I click this switch is the standby power toggle switch, and that's the only way I know how to connect it to the table that has the data that tells me how that switch works. And you know, I thought about that for a long time, and we came up with a great solution. Okay, insert a better demo here. That's coming right up. So we're gonna go back to the file we were in, and this one looks a little different. So this one, we drew all of the art, and what that means is we drew all of the panels without controls, and then we drew all of the controls, and the controls are all individually in a table, and so therefore they're all being showed via fields. I can click on them. This switch has 2 positions, so there's up and there's down. This switch has 3 positions. There's up, there's middle, and there's down. You know, this, turn the aids up. This, you know, this switch, like you saw in the other one, has 3 positions. This switch has 4 positions. That's all controlled via data in tables. So so that was really helpful. It looks a ton better. I don't ever have to worry that someone's going to come and say, hey, use my photograph. And so, you know, we really liked this better. And then of course, because everything's drawn by us, we don't have this perspective problem. So we also have some controls up here. We're going to ignore sound because it works great on the Mac, but for the life of me, and maybe this is my deficiency, I cannot get sound to work on the iPad. So so ultimately that's probably going to come out because it's going to be the primary way this gets used. But so when I have info on, now when I click on, you know, a switch, we bring up the same controls that you saw before about the switch. We also still have when you click on a panel, it brings up the information about all the switches. And because we made the graphics, they just look a ton better. I sleep much better because of it. The other cool thing, though, is that while I drew all of these myself, I am not the world's best illustrator. And if somebody decides, in my company decides, hey, I want to kind of make those switches look better, they can make them look better, and I have to replace it in one place. And all of these switches, all of these, whatever's gotten replaced, instantly happens on all of the layouts where that object is used. So this toggle switch is really only in the database once. And so that's been really helpful. Now, one of the coolest things that I wanted to do that nobody else has done, I'm not going to say people couldn't figure it out, but I think that based on the methodology that people have been using for this sort of application, it would be a pain in the butt. But I really wanted to do it because this is a real world scenario for pilots. is that when they get in a cockpit at night, this is the panel and what they see. And we could do this because we drew all the art, but we could also do this because FileMaker is so flippin' cool that this was not a challenge to do. It's, to me, it's super sweet, but you know, FileMaker did this like a champ. And then, of course, at some point, they're going to hit a button and they're going to turn the illumination for these controls on. And this is what it looks like. And so this was also really a great thing, because from a training perspective, I mean, let's be honest, you know, if you're training on this and then you get into the cockpit and it looks like this, you know, especially if you're not seasoned in the aircraft, this is a challenge. And even this mode with the illumination on, it looks differently. So, you know, it's really good to familiarize yourself with the controls as they exist this way. So that was something that I think is going to, especially for pilots, just really impress them. So we were really happy about that. The way this works that's interesting is this. So on this layout, and this is the, I suppose, the one downside to developing it this way. Each of these panels and the panels, I'm not sure how well everybody can see it, but like these are actually 3 panels stacked. There's a little line that separates them. Each of these panels are sitting on a 1-row portal. So all of these panels exist in a table somewhere. And this panel is defined to say these are the panels in the master panels table that are going on here, and you know, they all are in there in a certain particular order. There's a portal here, and we're showing row 12, and we're only showing 1 row. So this cargo temp select panel is the 12th record in this table. And so I get that panel. I just have to size the portal accordingly to fit it. So some of these portals are sized a little, like this one's obviously deeper because this panel is deeper. This is row 13 of that table. And the reason this is important is because when I click on a control, I need to be able to grab keys off that record to be able to say, well, this is the 3rd control for this panel. And that's where I was stuck. How could I grab, without needing a custom script, how could I grab to be able to get all the parameters for how this switch is supposed to work? How could I grab that without being able to grab keys? And how could I grab keys when all I've got is an invisible button hovering over a field? And I told myself, you have to solve this, because if you can't solve this, you're going to bury yourself in scripts, and QC down the line is going to become really, really difficult. You're going to need an enormous amount of testing because every script is going to be different. Where the script for these controls are all the same. It's like when we use portal rows now, when you click on a portal row, you have access to all of the data in the subtable that portal row is being generated by for the record you clicked on. So I can grab anything off the record for this panel. So here, I just need to know that this is the 3rd control that I've assigned. I need to grab the data about the 3rd control. And that became super, super easy. So easy that when I build these, I can copy this button and paste it here on this panel, because this is the first one and this is the first one. I need to make no other change to it. it's simply looking through the portal at the first button and if I duplicate it here, and this is the second button, it's a handful of things to change that are so easy to say, well, this is the second button, that not only is it much cleaner in terms of setup, not only is it going to be much easier in terms of QC, but even laying these out is so much easier because there really are only a handful of different controls. So that was sort of the big win. And I think that's the thing I mean, I'm sure it's been done. I haven't personally done it where you use portals, one row portals to go specifically grab a record out of another table, and you want one and only one record, and build something like this with that. So that's sort of the overview. I'm going to switch back because I know that I will begin talking more and more, and we need to keep moving along. So that indeed was the better demo. So file size, of course, is now shrunk because, you know, I just have one version of each of these knobs. I have it in all of its different rotations. And I've actually been able to add, like, the reason this one's red is because I have built different colored ones for training purposes. So they're all in there, but they're all in there in their different rotations, and it just calls them accordingly, sort of with a smart code that's been set up. So, and I can get into how that's built if anyone's interested. As I said, it became much faster to build. Features, because now it's table driven with data, like the flow thing that you saw on the other one is much more flexible and powerful in this one. And again, updating our work is extremely fast. I think these buttons look great, but I'm sure we're going to get a better digital artisan that says, oh my God, I could make those all so much better. And I'm going to say, go for it. And it's, you know, it's updating a handful of things, and the whole thing is different. So, so that's, I kind of wanted to leave some room for Q&A because, you know, I never can get a real read on whether everybody's bored or whether people are intrigued about how any particular thing works. But I'd like to turn it over to Q&A to see if anybody has any questions or interest in that, and leave some time to be able to answer it. So.
Hey, Peter, can you show
Yes.
us what the record behind those portals look like?
I
And
would
is
love
that-
to.
Is that one like standard record configuration, or do you have like, I've got 7 different types of panels that fill up this entire thing, so there are 7 different portal types, or how's that go?
I'm going to give you an overview. So I kind of went a little overboard, but I think it's going to be useful in the future. I have 3 tables that are hierarchical that define, I call these the individual little panels modules. Like I was saying before, the modules are shared between different aircraft type, right? So this may be this is the 777-200 ER for American Airlines. I already know the Delta One differs in this electrical panel, which is in the middle left here. It doesn't differ by much, but it differs. So I wanted to build a database that had panels, and the panel is the first level of, or modules, I'm sorry, modules. The first level of modules is sort of just a classification category. The second level of modules is the module itself, which is just that background graphic. And then the third table says these are the controls on that module, and sort of I give them an order in which they're on there so that I can refer to that later. So, and then part of that record, is it a button? Is it a knob? And actually which one it is. There's another table that actually has all the buttons and knobs and what their different states are for like daytime, nighttime, and nighttime illuminated. So so that just covers like that's let's call that the master collection of modules. And then for this particular panel, this pulls the subset of that. So there's another 3 tables that say this is the panel, these are the modules on the panel, which is actually what we're looking at here. It's the modules on this panel. That's what these individual portals are connected to. And then the controls on that, because the controls may be slightly different. So I'm going to switch layouts and I'm going to show you. So this one is the panel modules themselves. So for example, this was one of the modules, and you can see that it's just the background graphic of it. And then just for my easy sake, I have a portal that shows me the 2 controls that are on this panel. This one is the cockpit voice recorder one. They're not in any particularly good order as far as logical on the thing, but it doesn't really matter, right? I just need to know where they are so I can say to each portal which row to start with. But each one is different. Some are obviously more complex and have more controls. And so this is the table that the panel layout that's you guys were looking at had everything pulls for the graphic, and then it's able to pull the sub records for the actual controls themselves. But as you can see, they're all numbered. So this panel has 16 controls, and so control number 1, there's a button for control 1, and it's going to be able to know from this record. I will show you that too, because that's actually a good thing to see. So it knows by this record what kind of control it is. Is it a knob? Is it a switch? The current position that it's in, and for things like buttons. So what I guess I didn't push a lot of buttons, and I'm going to go back and do that. Buttons have text that appears when you push them. So this has the capability of saying, okay, well, when it's in position number 1, what text are we showing? What's the color of the text? When it's in position number 2, and so on and so on and so forth. So, when we're back at this table, and I'm going to zoom up a little bit I don't know if this is small on people's screens or not. I can push a button, and that generic button, this would be button 3, knows it goes to that table and says, oh, well, in position number 1, this field that sits over this part of this button, because I know it's a switch, so I've put a field 1 here and field 2 here, is on, and it's actually in a light gray. When it goes to position number 2, this goes off and the word off comes on, and that's in an amber. So that's all data that's stored. I could go into that and change it to crash, and it will change the word off to crash. And none of that is sort of custom hard coded on each layout. So that makes it really easy to migrate. I mean, not only do all these buttons say different things, that's because that's the 6th button or 7th button, but not only do these buttons all say different things, but when you move them from one application to another, what it says on the panel for this 777 may be different than what it says on another one. So, and the colors that I've set it up to be able to handle are like red and green, and basically all the illumination colors that I've been able to find in an aircraft. And if there's a new one, then I can set it up to do that. So was that too quick, or was that informative? Was that the answer you were hoping?
That was great. The thing I have to keep reminding myself is that you're doing single row portals, so all of your button placement can be specific to that portal. My brain keeps going back to how do you get the buttons to line up when it's multiple rows, but you're not doing that.
since you brought that up, I'm going to tell you the real pain in the butt with this is when I go into layout mode, I can't get a preview, right? Like when you say sample data, well, it doesn't actually look at a relationship to give you sample data. It looks at, first record data from what you're looking at for that. So this is the singular downside. I'm going to tell you that it does not in any way override the other benefits from this, but it's a pain. I've gotten used to it a little bit more. Like I'm doing a lot of flipping back and forth between layout and browse, and then going back and then, nudging what I think the right amount is until I get things where I want them. But at first I was wondering if it was going to be a little flaky using portals to handle this, and where the portal is going to be like rock solid. And, again, like not only the rock solid, but I didn't even like this switches to night so well, and then to illumination. I remember not only is all this data in another table, all of these graphics are 3 tables deep from the screen. So it goes to the table you saw, that's the modules for this panel, right? And then it goes to the component, and then it goes to the actual file where all the graphics are individually stored. So all the iterations of all the panels and switches and buttons live pretty deep from that, and it's instant and it never fails. And I was really happy about that. I mean, it's one of the reasons that when I saw that happen, I said to myself, this is the reason I use this tool, and this is one of the places this tool really excels. So for whatever that's worth, it does this amazingly well. So hopefully that's a decent look at that process.
Well, I have a question. We've all struggled with being able to identify what button is pressed or what field is entered without having to, call a script with a parameter on each button or whatever.
Yeah.
On this layout, how are you identifying each individual field? I know you can get the portal row, and that helps narrow it down.
Yeah,
But
so that's
how
a
do you
great question. And I'm going to open my scripts. I'm going to warn everybody. So just a little disclaimer. Chris has often said, Pete, if you ever get hit by a bus, no one's going to be able to work on your stuff, because some of my stuff, well, as far as fields go, I don't follow the conventional field naming structure that y'all use, because I pretty much developed this all. It's not that I've not been in developer conferences, but a lot of the stuff that, I just sort of came up with on my own. And so just be prepared for that and don't get freaked out by that. But so basically, if you look down here, you can see 1 control, 2 control, 3 control, and then there's some subsets for some special parts for those controls if they exist. Like for knobs, there's an option where you can say, well, every time I click a knob, I want it to advance, or there's an option where if I click on the left side of the knob, I want it to go down. If I click on the right side, I want it to go up. So there are some different ways to activate controls, but basically what happens is this: the first control on a layout is going to get 0-1 control script, one of these, depending on what it is, but fundamentally this. And then what the script does is says, in fact, these scripts between 0-1 control and 0-2 control and 3 and so on are all exactly the same. It says, look at the name of the script you're in, and if it's an 0-1, then you're a 1. And then what it does is it uses that as part of the match to go to not only the record that you're looking at because of the portal you're in, right? So we know the record you're looking at, but now it knows to be able to go and say, I need the first control information for this particular record. And
Is that like upper left to lower right? You organize them that way?
That's how I do it, but I don't have to do it that way. I mean, I do it that way because if I don't do it that way, I'm going to bring somebody on staff to take this over and they're going to shoot me. But in fact, it might be helpful if I show the crazy relationship graph for this part.
The graph is mostly off screen.
I'm sorry, what's that?
That's mostly off screen.
The graph has to be
so hang on. Yep, I'm gonna switch to. It's funny how many little windows there are, even though I closed most of my windows. Where is my relationship graph? And why are you not giving it to me? You know what? I'm just going to show this. Okay, so you should be looking at a bunch of FileMaker windows now. So in the relationship graph, there's a relationship from based on that number 1 through 20 for all of the different controls. So if you click on 1, the script knows it's a 1 because it's the script for 1, and then it can drive right to this module, the first control on that module, and then be able to see all the parameters about it. Is it the script doesn't need to know it's a button, but the script needs to be able to go to that record and say, I've been pressed. And the record is the one that actually knows what to do. So for example, like for knobs, right? Like this was something that I thought was really kind of a nice thing, sort of a nice way to work this. For a knob, okay, hang on, this probably is not where it lives. Yeah, okay, so this is this particular this is this knob, right? These are the 3 states of it, and we know it's a knob. This file says there are 3 positions for this knob. The default position is position 1, and the position increment is 45 for 45 degrees, and I'll tell you how that actually works here. The minimum position is -45, and the maximum position is 45. So there's a code that gets built. I'm actually going to create a new window for this so that we don't have to keep popping back and forth. Back in the file we were looking at a second ago, there's a code. And this code that I've highlighted changes, the end of this code is the graphic it's pointing to. So in that file where we saw, 1 record for each of these graphics, this code defines exactly how to find this graphic. This is the -45 position for this knob. D is for daytime. I doesn't really matter to us right now, but I use it as it's an input control versus a gauge or whatever. If there were a color for this knob, if I defined it, if I wanted to pull the red one, that would be in this code. So every time you click, it uses the information to say, oh, my increment is 45. So I'm going to change this code to go from -45 to 0. And then, so the next click brings it to 0. And then so Peter, I'm going to go another 45.
You've got like 72 different versions of every knob in 5-degree increments.
So I'm not doing increments I don't need. So I thought about doing that because I have an obsessive personality, but I resisted and said, okay, well, most of these knobs don't have that many, but it's possible. I mean, we'll certainly have some to add. And the great thing is I can add them at any time. If I needed them in 30-degree increments, I could go make them in Illustrator and then bring them in here and then create additional versions of this control with different numbers in the code, and then it would know how to pull the right ones. In fact, there are a few that haven't been made yet. So when you rotate to them, they disappear. But of course, that's because we're in process of doing this. But I mean, the long and short is, for every version that we need, we'll make one, and I'm going to do my best not to be obsessive about it. Again, on the plus side, I only need one of each one, right? So I don't need, like, they're not sitting on every layout. So while we do add, I mean, well, we needed that anyway, right? Because if I needed these 3 positions, even if I was even in the first iteration where they were being like sitting directly on the layout, the problem is I needed a whole bunch of them. Every knob needed its own iterations. Then it was showing and hiding rather than a calculation that was just changing the display field for it. So does that make sense, kind of how this works? And then when it gets to 45, because this file says the maximum position is 45, it won't try to go 45 degrees more. So it won't try to go to 90 because 90 is past the maximum. So depending on the mode you're in, it will then go back to the first position, which is -45.
Yeah,
and that's
it's
all
clever.
in the script.
That's great. I'm sorry, Lynn, I cut you off a minute ago.
No, that's okay. It's just like I'm trying to get it straight in my head that the script identifies which control it is, and
Yep.
the portal row identifies which record it is.
Yep.
And so you get all your parameters for each control for there. That's very clever and flexible.
And when you think about all the aircraft we have to do, like, it was hurting my brain to think about how we were going to do all of the Boeing models, all the Airbus models, and we have 6 manufacturers we've identified that we want to do. The massive overhead, but just the craziness of saying, if you had a script for each of those buttons that said, well, I'm this button, I'm the cargo temp select aft button, and so that's the only way you could identify it, then that was just going to be that's where I said, it's funny. It's like when the pandemic hit and all these companies said, oh, we could never make Zoom work or work at home work. Well, when the pandemic hit, everybody figured it out, because that's what human beings do, right? If you tell yourself you have to do it, you figure out a way. And that's what I told myself, is you can't move forward with this unless you can figure this out doing it in a different way. And you're not going to do this product if you can't figure it out. And this product has a lot of potential.
It seems to me that it's not how many manufacturers of aircraft you have, but how many manufacturers of knobs you have.
Well, so it's both, right? The great thing is this, though, right? Like, so again, like the 777 for American, well, from Boeing and at American, they have a lot of different iterations. And so most of the panels are very, very, very similar. The knobs are the same, I mean, there's a lot of reuse of all of this artwork. Now, Airbus has a totally different set of knobs and buttons, and that's okay. Those will go in here, but I feel like it's much easier to handle that than it is to handle not only making that art, but putting it on every layout. And I think, again, this is why you see nobody making an app that says, hey, we do a whole bunch of airplanes, we only do one. And I mean, that's what I can assume, which I just think is a bad choice. So first of all, let's say you were a pilot and, well, I was able to find the 3 aircraft out there from different people that made different apps. It's a horrible user experience for you. Every app is going to work in a very different way and have a very different feature set. We're going to provide a very good, solid, uniform, comprehensive feature set with a UX that is, with a UX that's the same across the entire product line, and that's a very compelling feature.
your data mapping to your scripts, I almost liken to XY coordinates on a GPS system, where your record really serves as your latitude, and your longitude is defined by which button position.
Yeah.
So if you think about it from a graphical standpoint, from a positional standpoint, it sort of makes sense in that respect.
I just couldn't figure out a way to do that in FileMaker. And of course, this is a scrollable thing. I mean, there are a lot of things that I was like, oh, maybe I could. And I was like, nah, I can't do it that way. And so, and that's when it sort of hit me, right? Like, we use portals every day, and every time we use a portal, we grab that information from the table beneath. It just, that's what we do. We do that all the time. And it's the first time I've ever used portals this way, whereas like, hey, portal, like, in fact, and it's not that I questioned why FileMaker did this, but I was like, I personally have never used a portal, I don't think, that said, hey, I don't want you to start until row 12. I know it for pagination purposes, it can be a very useful thing. I just don't personally work that way. So I had never used that feature before. And now, of course, this wouldn't work if I couldn't have done that, because none of these modules are in there in the order in which they were put in. And I wouldn't want to try to lock it in that way. And of course, it doesn't matter, because they're not all stacked on top of each other anyway. So this was sort of I want to call it a godsend, that I could say, hey, I need portal row 12, and I just want one row.
Very cool. Thank you
Very
so much.
cool.
Yeah, Peter, for showing us, and you'll have to come back when you have gotten to the next stage. You mentioned putting it into the iOS App Store, which I'm sure will be a journey in of itself.
It will be.
Are you planning to use the iOS app SDK? Is that?
I am indeed. Yep. And MBS has a lot of ability to facilitate. I mean, I couldn't do it without that, in terms of being able to do payment processing and a whole bunch of store stuff, because the iOS SDK itself, I'm not sure. I haven't tasked any of our devs to see if there's any way that we could do it in the wrapper, but our speculation is we couldn't do it in the wrapper. That we wouldn't have any way of interacting with the FileMaker file itself. So that's going to be our solution, and we're looking for. But there's also a lot of parts of this that aren't in here yet that are going in, like the whole testing regimen and this pilot, this sort of like process flow thing, which is really cool. In fact, if I can find it, if you want to indulge me for a second, I think this is the right one. So oh, you can't see that. So are you able to see the panel again?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so the goal with the flows is to say, okay, well, you've got controls that you've got to interact with, and in the one that I showed you, because I had forgotten the flow, I was instantly getting them wrong. Well, in the learning process, that's not very helpful, right? So depending on where you are in the learning process, you could say, hey, I'm learning the flow for the first time, which means I need help, right? So it will be able to say, based on what kind of difficulty level you want, it's going to be able to turn on numbers, and even the color behind this number 1 that appeared over the app cargo temp slip knob is changeable by us, as you can sort of see here, right? Like, it's red here. And then it will number the controls accordingly. And then we can set it so that as you successfully put a control in the right place, it turns green. But basically you're going to be able to step through them this way. And then as you turn the difficulty up, at some point those numbers don't turn on, and you've got to do it out of your memory, right? Because that's the whole goal. And that's going to be a super cool implementation. And So the other interesting thing about that is that some of the apps out there, that's one of the features that some of them do offer, but they don't offer it in a customizable way. So for example, Spirit Airlines tells all their pilots, hey, go download this app. And it's got some other airlines flows in it. So go into our manual and see where they differ and learn the differences yourself. Because they don't want to, they don't want to have they didn't want to pay to have a version made, but because the app isn't customizable, the way that they hard coded the flow in there is the way it's in there, and that's all you can do. So my best friend's son just became a pilot for Spirit, and he was talking about how, you know, the flow is okay from a training perspective, but he had to make a whole bunch of notes about the order of which they do things, which just happens to be different. So in this particular case, we're going to be able to, because of the way we're writing the engine of it, put in whatever companies flows in the order that they do them, and even let pilots make their own and customize them, which you wouldn't think would be a big deal. I didn't think so, but my best friend said pilots will absolutely love that, because they all ultimately have their own little cheat sheet of how they like to do things. And this will just help them with that. So I'm happy to come back and show it to you guys as we, I mean, I can wait until the end. I'll leave it up to you guys and what you want to see, but I'm also happy to kind of show it to you as we make obviously more significant progress to see some of the different parts as well. So
that would be great.
I'm happy to show it whenever you guys want.
Yeah, seeing a product through its development process is very educational.
I think so. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's like, there's a lot of stuff that's like, I don't want to say half baked, right? But like, I mean, I think it's really, you know, again, UI UX is, that's kind of my thing too. And, you know, it's something that, you know, there's pieces of it in here. These don't necessarily reflect any pricing. But this was just sort of like a, let's start putting some screens together, right? And but it's not enough of it's done. But as it all begins to come together, right, the testing and the flows and having more done on the screens, and we're not sure we're done with the design of all the information panels as far as the style of we want them to be, and I'm happy to show you guys the progress as it moves along. So I'm thrilled that you guys like it. I wasn't, you know, again, it's hard when you do something that's kind of non-standard, how many people are interested. But I do think there are some things here that probably could be helpful and for solving problems that we come up with.
Excellent. All right, I think we should probably wrap it up for today, but I want to thank our presenters again. We have Patrick Reagan, we have Jake Johnson, and Peter Lauwers, and we will see you all next month. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much,
Thanks,
everyone.
Peter.